DFS Friday here on the Pete Overzet YouTube channel. We got Block Party with JMToWin walking through the Week 7 slate on DraftKings, getting his favorite plays at each position, and then we'll build a lineup on DraftKings for single entry 3-max contest using his favorite building blocks. And then in the second half of the DraftKings portion of the show, we're going to have ShipMyMoney, very sharp DFS player from the in-game syndicate and Run the Sims. He'll come on and walk through the angles he's liking. We'll check out some sim results as well. And then immediately following this show on the same channel, we'll roll right into Off and On the Clock, which will be the underdog preview for Week 7 with John and Nez. So buckle up, 3.5 hours of hardcore DFS talk. I'm Pete. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, coach spot bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right. I feel like we're recording at the perfect time, JM, because I would say just about an hour or two ago, I had so many questions about injury situations, even in the biggest premier games of the week. I feel like we've had some loose ends tied up a little bit here. Obviously, still some situations that are a bit murky, but I think we're ready to rock here for Week 7.
Yeah, well, while that intro was playing, I was thinking this is the first week of the season where I feel, instead of feeling ahead on Friday, I feel like I'm sort of swimming to catch up on Friday morning. And first I was thinking, well, that's because NBA tips off next week, which is kind of this week becomes my last like busy work week of the year because I got to help with getting NBA optimized off the ground, NBA props off the ground, like kind of high level decisions, conversations and whatnot. And then I realized, well, another bigger part of it is just there's so much news up in the air, which is natural for this point in the season. But yeah, it's sort of a weird week where you open the slate. It looks really straightforward and obvious. I mentioned in my journal at the beginning of the week, like I had Cowboys fatigue. You open the slate, you're like, God, another Cowboys slate. Like, how many times can we have this situation? You get deeper into the week, and you realize it's a much more interesting and nuanced week than it seems on the surface. But then also, it's like there are so many things we don't know yet. We're going to keep getting answers throughout this show, recording it Friday morning, Friday afternoon on the East Coast, early Friday afternoon for you. And then, yeah, we'll keep getting answers throughout the afternoon. So this is a week where kind of take our thoughts, our high-level thoughts on these players, these games, these situations, roster construction of the week, et cetera. But don't take this as like the gospel approach of how to attack this slate. It's more getting a feel for this slate, which is obviously what we're doing anyway. But yeah, I think that's important to note on this particular week.
Yeah, we can do a quick kind of rundown of the stuff we do kind of have confirmed that I was, thinking about a lot last night and this morning. The two big ones, it seems like Quinton Johnson and CeeDee Lamb are both good to go. They're going to play. On the flip side, Josh Downs has been ruled out for the Colts. Terry McLaurin has been ruled out. And I would say kind of the two murky ones that I have my eye on right now, Deebo Samuel seems truly questionable. There was just a quote where he said that heel is still aggravating him and will just have to see about playing on Sunday. That obviously has huge domino effects to how we think about the Commanders offense. And then DeAndre Swift, who was downgraded to a limited practice yesterday. Apparently it wasn't a new injury that he sustained. So today's practice report will be pretty telling for DeAndre Swift. Are there any other kind of new situations that you are wanting to see clarified before you kind of make final decisions?
Those would be the main ones. I mean, especially the Commanders stuff. I would say just from history of 10 plus years doing this, that type of quote from Deebo would typically indicate a guy who's going to play, right? They get a shot before the game, they go out and play. Then the bigger question becomes, is he playing 60% of the snaps, 65% of the snaps? What does that mean? In a passing attack that's somewhat low volume as is, Jayden topped 25.2 DraftKings points 6 times last year. In 3 of those, he threw 30 or fewer pass attempts. And 2 of them, he threw 24 or fewer pass attempts. So then it's like, well, if Deebo is only out there for a portion of the game, like, are there actually enough targets to spill over to these cheap wideouts for them to be viable? So this becomes one that it seems like we're going to have questions and sort of theorizing about this all the way up to kickoff, because even if we get Deebo playing and it's not as black and white as, okay, Deebo's playing, you play him, it becomes a thing of what does this mean for the offense? I do think we'll get to this more at tight end, but I do think Ertz is probably like the sharpest way to just plug a guy in here. You kind of look at his numbers with Jayden this year. He has 3 touchdowns in 3 games, or we take out the game where he had 0. 3 touchdowns in the other 3 games. Let's just say he had just 1 touchdown in those games. his points per game would be the same as Travis Kelce, who's about 1K more. And so he's kind of used, same age-ish range, kind of used in the same way in this offense. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's an easy way to say, hey, let me just get access to the points in this offense on a week where salary kind of looks tight until you start messing around with some cheap tight ends. And but yeah, there's a lot of interesting things in that game in particular because it's a pretty key game on the slate.
Yeah, and I guess to, say Deebo is out, I mean, I think anecdotally, it's like, yeah, that hurts the ceiling of that game environment. It would be interesting to see if the total comes down. I'm seeing it at 54.5. From a DFS perspective, if Deebo's out, do you have any less interest in that game, or is this just, full steam ahead regardless?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's full steam ahead. We're looking at what they had. It was 57 and 59 points against the Panthers and the Jets. It's like, I think that the Commanders, even missing Deebo and McLaurin, still has as good of a shot as those teams had of this game total being up there. We had 77 total points with the Giants. Nobody would have looked at that Giants offense and said, oh, we'll probably get a 77-point game here. We had 80 points with the Packers. So I think that Cliff Kingsbury, Jayden Daniels, honestly, like I was heavily critical of Kingsbury during his Arizona days. I was skeptical with Washington. But the rhythm and flow of this offense and what they do to keep an opponent off balance is just so well schemed up, so well designed. Kingsbury has such a good feel for calling a game that I just think that this is a game where we're going to see those points scored. So then the question is, how do we take advantage of that? And I don't think it's as black and white as Deebo's out, now we play Luke McCaffrey, or Deebo's out, now we play Chris Moore. I think it'll be very interesting to sort of parse through. So obviously I'll be doing that in the player grid, in my journal throughout the weekend. But no, I in terms of the game environment, I'm still drawn to it completely if we're missing both of the top wideouts for Washington.
I mean, this is probably the biggest, separation from a game on a slate where it's just clear. So how do you think about that from kind of like a game theory and a tournament perspective? I'm sure some people will have the like, well, what if it fails, or should I play it just through the running backs? From your portfolio perspective, and I know we're doing this on a Friday afternoon and a lot can change, but just kind of macro, are you leaning to be like with the field on this one, or how do you handle this from an overall portfolio perspective? Yeah,
well, this is one of those places where that marriage of knowing ball and understanding DFS strategy and theory benefits us quite a bit, because I think the typical like really sharp DFS player, because there's so many sharp DFS players who are sharp because they don't know ball. They don't know the sports they're playing. And so they can just rely on the math and strategy. And so other people put too much into what they know. And these people are like, I'll just assume we don't know anything and play the math and strategy and come out ahead over time. This is one of those spots where I feel like I know ball well enough to say, yeah, I mean, there are outlier scenarios, but the scenario in which this is a low scoring game or like an underwhelming game, that's a pretty thin scenario, right? I don't want to bet on this game disappointing. Obviously, football is weird. Weird things can happen. This game can disappoint, but it's a low probability outcome here. And so, and one of the things too, like I'm not a big bettor. I mentioned that last week, but I put money, I put a unit, maybe I put 2 units on the over here, and it's a massive over under, right? But one of the things I look at in betting is these extremes where you have like a really low total or really high total, because there's a cap on how high bettors are willing to push a total. If you put a 57.5 total, 58.5 total, like that's going to look so weird that everybody's going to bet to the under. But maybe this game actually should have that type of total. You know what I mean? So this isn't a game where I think 88% of the spread money, something like that, is 88% of the money bet on the total is on the over in this game. Like people are seeing it that way, right? This is a game where I'm very confident in it playing out the way that we expect it to play out in terms of the points being scored. I'll talk about that more in the Angles podcast today, about like how these offenses and defenses sort of match up with each other and why I expect this to be high scoring. But then the bigger question is pricing, right? Salary cap. What's the distribution of the points in this game? And do we actually have to have pieces from this game? Because it could be a 27-31 game and not end up yielding any had to have it DFS scores. And so I think that we have to think about things through that lens as well. So yeah, it's a very interesting game to have on really what's shaping up as a very interesting slate this week.
Yeah. And, if we kind of move to some secondary game environments, I mean, the other one that kind of really stands out from a total perspective is this Colts and Chargers game, 48.5. We mentioned Downs out, QJ in, but otherwise this one kind of seems like if there would be a clear number 2 game of the week from a shootout perspective, it would be this one. Or do you disagree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the ceiling is pretty capped on this game because of the way these teams play and what makes them good. So the Colts very much going to drive the field and then score in the red zone. The Chargers very much going to I'm not going to say allow teams to drive the field. I was actually thinking about this last night. Well, it's funny because these two teams, like the Lou Anarumo defense, people call it bend but don't break because he does let teams march the field. But again, you get 10, 11 drives per game. So the goal is just to disrupt the drive at some point. So you have a team like the Broncos that they're so good across the board that it's like, or the Texans, you watch them, it's like every single play is a battle to pick up 4 or 5 yards. It's like, man, how is anybody going to march the field on them? And then you have teams like the Colts and the Chargers are the same way with Jesse Minter's defense, where it's like, we're just looking to disrupt the drive at some point. So every play, the Colts are throwing something at the quarterback to try to confuse them. Every play, the Colts are throwing some sort of unique stunt or pressure. Every play, the Colts are shifting coverage away from what it looks like pre-snap. They're just trying to do something every play so that hopefully on one play per drive, they can disrupt that drive. And then if they don't, the other team gets in the red zone and they try to stop them there. So that's kind of how both these defenses play. Both of these offenses are good enough. They're probably not going to get disrupted as they're moving down the field, but it still takes a while to get to the red zone. And then you have to convert those red zone trips into touchdowns. And so it's just harder for a shootout to develop in that type of matchup, in that type of game. And I've been pretty unimpressed with the Chargers offense in terms of what they look like without their offensive line, without their running backs. There's not a lot of schematic advantage. There's not a lot of, like I was talking about watching Kingsbury, and it's like, man, he does so much to keep the defense off balance. Greg Roman and the Chargers don't really do that. It's a lot more right now. It's a lot more, all right, Herbert, Quinton Johnston, Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen, we're better than the defense. Herbert, drop back and pick them apart, right? Which is fine, but then it's a lot of like 5-yard curls and 7-yard outs and stuff like that, where again, you're just sort of marching the field. And so, and they're getting the ball out more quickly because of the defense or the offensive line issues. And so if Joe Alt comes back this week, that would be a huge plus. That's one that I haven't checked where we're at in the last day or two on that one, but that would be a big one to keep an eye on. But yeah, I have a harder time seeing it turning into a shootout. I think points are scored here. Both teams score in the 20s. I have a harder time seeing this being one where it's like, oh my gosh, like it was 38-35. Like it's just not the nature of these teams. And so, I'm probably a little bit lower on this game than maybe the field will end up being this week.
I guess some of the other interesting spots to talk about would be one, if there is a game that you think could challenge, obviously it's the tough task to challenge this Cowboys Commanders game, but if there was a clear number 2, who that would be. And then we have two of the teams in really good spots with big team totals, the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Raiders, and of course the Packers versus the Cardinals. So any other kind of macro notes or spots that you're leaning toward here?
Yeah, so it's not in the nature of the, speaking of betting, like I took the Bengals last week at plus 14.5 because like that's just not the style of the Packers to be like, oh, we're going to take a lead, we're going to stomp on them, right? The Packers it's a lot of runs and then a lot of downfield throws. And then when they kind of have a game in control, you don't need as many of the downfield throws. And so they're not a team that is typically like things can break weird. There can be turnovers in short fields and all of a sudden the Packers are up by 25 points, but they're not typically the type of team that's going to have one of those just runaway blowout wins like the Lions, right? We know that the Lions are perfectly willing. Or take the Patriots this week. I think they're another one, 24.75 point team total right now. But like you're talking about Mike Vrabel going back to Tennessee the week they fired Brian Callahan. I'm sure most of you have heard this stat, but it's a pretty fun one. The Titans have 4 wins since they fired Mike Vrabel. Obviously, the Patriots have 4 wins this year with Mike Vrabel. Like, do you have these spots where it's like, oh, if the Patriots get a lead, they could win this game 40-10, right? Like they would be willing to do that. I think if the Chiefs bringing back Rashee Rice would be willing to do that against the Raiders. Obviously, the Raiders with Max Crosby have found ways to play the Chiefs tough at times over the years. So I don't think it's just a slam dunk that the Chiefs can do this. But the Chiefs, the vibes around the Chiefs the last few weeks has been like, no, we're the best team in the NFL. People just don't see it yet. And part of that has been, we know what it's going to be like when Xavier Worthy comes back. And we've been practicing with Rashee Rice. We know what it's going to look like when we have our full stable of weapons. And I was saying it, and I think it was after week 3 where people were like, the Chiefs look really bad. And I was like, no, like if you watch the games, everything looks good except they have no weapons on offense. Like they still look like a Super Bowl caliber team in terms of like their intensity, their lack of mistakes, their cohesiveness, the way they're playing together. And then it's like, you get back Xavier Worthy. Now you get back Rashee Rice. Like I honestly, like it seems like the vibes around Kansas City, around the team is we're about to take off and show the league what we can be. And very much that's kind of how I'm seeing this team in this game environment. So I do think that if the Chiefs are able to get things rolling here, this could be a spot where they're like, yeah, let's win 42-10 and put up 6 touchdowns, put up 5 touchdowns. So I do think that that's a viable spot to say, yes, typically if it's not going to be competitive, it's harder to get those tournament winners. I think it's a viable spot to say it's not going to be competitive more than likely. If it's going to be competitive, it's going to be competitive in a lower scoring game. The Raiders aren't going to hang with the Chiefs. But if the Chiefs are able to do it, I think that they would be willing to just keep piling on points in this one.
Yeah, and we'll obviously talk about the Rashee Rice chalk when we get to wide receiver, because that's going to be a big thing to discuss. But let's go ahead and launch into quarterback. And kind of speaking of chalk, Jayden Daniels projecting to be the most popular play on the slate. I guess I'll say this. Do you think that's warranted? And if Deebo does trend downward or ends up being out, do you think that makes the Daniels chalk even more fragile? I know we were talking about that through the lens of the overall game environment, but I am curious what you think about Jayden with and without Deebo in this ownership.
Yeah, I think it's a little early for me to make firm statements on it, right? So take this kind of with a grain of salt. I think that what we're really saying with Jayden is he takes over a game, right? Like these big games that he had last year, like I said, 3 of them were 23, 24, 30 pass attempts. And then you're hoping for like the 8 to 12 rush attempts from him. So I don't know that we're necessarily, it's not like we're betting on him and saying he's got to put up 350 yards through the air. We're just saying he can get 1 or 2 touchdowns on the ground. He can pick up 5 or 6 points. If he picks up 6 points on the ground, that's equivalent to a rushing touchdown. Then he adds another rushing touchdown. That's 12 points right there. Then he throws for another couple touchdowns. He's up to 20 before any passing yards, right? So I think that this is one of those spots where whether or not Deebo plays, Jayden is still very viable. The price tag's really cheap, right? He really should be, in the context of where we get to in quarterback pricing deeper into the season and where we've already gotten to in pricing at other positions. Jayden should be like a 8,100 quarterback, something like that. He's 6,900. So it's hard to like poo-poo this play. I do think we're going to talk about this as we get to the building blocks. So spoiler alert, we're not going to do a Jayden building block. I think Jayden's very fine, right? I mentioned this. I'll mention this in the Angles podcast again, but I've built over 3,000 rosters this week in the optimizer. It's early week sims, right? So we don't have like full ownership and projections and all that, but like my 5th highest ROI roster out of 3,000 rosters is a Jayden roster, right? So it's like definitely there's viability to Jayden being the best way on the slate to build, but there's also viability to saying, what are the chances that Jayden goes for like 5x his salary? Like not tremendously high, right? So then if you can get 4x from a cheaper guy and he has a clear stacking partner, well, then you've opened up your roster to do something different with the rest of your roster. So like in a vacuum, is Jayden likely to put up the top raw score on the slate? Yes. But does that mean that he's necessarily the best way to build? No. And part of that's because you're not as clear on the stacking partner, especially if Deebo's out. And then part of that is just the function of how much you're having to pay for him and what that does to the rest of your roster, what else is available on this slate. So, yeah, I mean, I think that if we just say who's the best raw quarterback performer on the slate, it's going to be Jayden more often than not. I think people are overlooking Dak as well, right? Yeah. Where because he doesn't have the rushing upside and it's like, oh, he's a pocket passer, but he's got these 3 games of 26 plus DraftKings points. We go back to 2023 where he was doing it against bad competition, but he was constantly putting up 35 plus DraftKings points that year, mostly at home. Now we've got him at home against this attackable Commanders defense where they have been playing lights out against good defenses. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that either of these quarterbacks is a really sharp way to build. It's just not the only way to build. And I think on a week like this, it can be easy to get in that box of like, all right, well, like I can't even see how I can go outside of these guys. And it's like, well, they could be the highest scoring guys and not the best way to build. And I think that's important to think about this week.
Yeah. And the Dak conversation's interesting because I feel like just like in a vacuum, people would be on board with Dak. Like, hey, great game environment, has been playing really well. But I think the stacking stuff is tricky for people because we see him coming back and you're like a little queasy about him. Like how involved is he going to be coming off of this multi-week layoff? And then on the other hand, like Ferguson and Pickens are priced up as if CD's not playing. And so you feel like you're paying a premium for that. So I do wonder if that kind of almost like not trickle down, but like reverse direction with the stacking dysfunction keeps people off of Dak a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like my first practice build of the week, which was on like Tuesday, I think at the airport, was a Dak build, but it had Pickens and Ferguson. So assuming no CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah.
And I had no more Dak builds in my hand builds until last night. And then last night it was like, what about, it was the last thing I did before I went to bed. It was like, what about Dak plus CeeDee Lamb plus Pickens? Like, there's value that people probably aren't talking about. I've got Rashee Rice on this roster. I've got Quinshon Judkins on this roster. I guess I can't give the whole roster away, but it's like there are ways to build with that and say, what if this is one of those types of games where Dak throws 5 touchdowns and both these guys smash and they score 80 combined points, because that's within the range of outcomes as well. And then I also started thinking, you know, like we're looking at the question marks and the downside and like, well, Pickens has played so well. What does that mean for CeeDee Lamb and all that? It's like, realistically, CeeDee Lamb is going to come back. Like Pickens is, I don't know what, a top 15 wide receiver maybe. CeeDee Lamb's a top 3, 4, 5 wide receiver. Like, he's going to come back and still get his 10, 11, 12 targets in this game environment would be my expectation. So I think you can go to CeeDee Lamb. Also, Pickens had, what was it, 9 targets in the second game or the first game of the season with CeeDee Lamb, and there was sort of that weird game where the targets were lower across the board. But like, Pickens can get 9 targets with CeeDee Lamb on the field as well and still put up a big game. So I think both these guys remain viable, and I think that the question marks around them will sort of boost the viability of them because they might come in a little bit lower owned because of the uncertainty.
And I would say the opposite for stacking uncertainty in why I think Mahomes could even ultimately end up being the most popular quarterback on the play on the slate is just because you have this Rashee Rice price tag that looks incredibly juicy relative to his projection. You have Xavier Worthy, who has been playing well. Kelsey always in play. What are your thoughts on Mahomes at 7K with what I envision to be, you know, I think he's going to come in over 15% when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I mean, we know how rare it is for quarterbacks to put up big games in non-competitive game environments. So that's the big caution flag, right? We look at these games and it's like, man, Mahomes is back. Look at these game logs. Look at these fantasy scores. But look at the game. You're playing Baltimore with Lamar Jackson on the other side. The entire mindset shifts of how you are attacking that game and how you're calling each drive. Because every drive is like, if we give them an inch, they can come back immediately, right? So every drive you're remaining aggressive. Same thing, that Jacksonville game, they lost that game. It was back and forth the entire game. When you're playing the Lions, similar to that game against the Ravens, where it's like every drive we have to be high octane, we have to be all out. And so that's not the setup against the Raiders. And that's the big risk, right? Is it wouldn't be surprising if the Chiefs just played this like a normal in control type of game, the way most teams would play it, and then Mahomes ends up with 18 to 23 DraftKings points. So I think there's a pretty high risk of that. But like I said at the top, I can also see the scenario in which the Chiefs say, no, let's just go, right? Let's go all out. So right now, I'm kind of playing around with different things in terms of how I'm going to attack this week. And potentially I've got like a really tight pool of like 3 quarterbacks or potentially a broader pool of 6 quarterbacks. Again, it's Friday morning, but in that broader pool of 6 quarterbacks, I would have a Mahomes roster and, you know, have maybe 10, 15% of my bankroll on the week on Mahomes. But in that tighter pool, he's not one of those guys. Because again, like the upside is that he gets to 4X, right? So there's other ways to get 4X your salary and then pay up for somebody else who can get you 4X. And so, I think there's a lot of different ways to go here, but I can see both scenarios for Mahomes. I can see it playing to the downside because they could control this game and just say, hey, we don't need Mahomes to take off in this one. In which case, Isaiah Pacheco becomes really interesting leverage, right?
Yeah.
Where we just say, who is nobody playing that? What if Pacheco gets 2 or 3 touchdowns? Everybody's on Mahomes and Rashee Rice, and then nobody's on Pacheco at 5K and he scores 2 or 3 touchdowns. So that's, you know, the leverage angle where it's like, no, Pacheco doesn't look good on paper, but he can hit. And if he hits, like he's hurting a ton of rosters. And so, there's a lot to play around with this offense, but I'm very much on board with the idea of how it plays to the upside. I just think that there are some caution flags you have to think about as well in that spot.
Yeah, and not to mention, I think kind of the combo ownership on Mahomes stacks is going to be pretty high relative to some of these other stacks. One game and quarterback we haven't talked about yet that I'm really curious your thoughts is Caleb Williams, 5,800 at home versus New Orleans. Obviously, Rome Odunze, coming off a little bit of a down week. We'll have to see on DJ Moore. I guess he's another kind of injury note we got to keep tabs on, but pretty good spot versus the Saints here and a nice team total. What do you think about Caleb?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's fine, right? Like he's got this one game this year where it's like, oh, we're really glad we played him. And it was against Dallas, So I think we have to take these game logs with a grain of salt. We've got 18 DraftKings points against Detroit. We've got 12.8 against Las Vegas. We've got 19.9 against Washington. Caleb Williams is one of the higher off-target throw rates in the NFL. And New Orleans, New Orleans might be the best 1-in-5 team we've ever seen, right? I guess we've got Baltimore as well, where you're going to have Lamar Jackson back, and they're still, barely underdogs to win their division. So we can't quite say that, but the Saints are highly, highly competitive. They're similar to the Cardinals, right? And you're like, yeah, they're probably not going to win this game, but they're probably going to be tough to beat and keep it close. And so, I don't think this is a slam dunk here that Caleb Williams comes out and just wrecks shop against the Saints in an outdoor game in Chicago, where, he and Ben Johnson are still trying to get their rhythm going, where when Caleb is doing stuff out of structure, it pops, right? But in the in structure, in rhythm stuff, which is what Ben Johnson's so good at designing and scheming up, there's still so much of it is precision. It was, I forget which game it was. I think Troy Aikman was calling a recent Caleb Williams game. Maybe it was somebody else, but they kept talking about like his ball placement and just like not getting the ball out in front of guys so they can catch it and run with it. Not getting the ball in the right spots where like some of these throws Daniel Jones is making this year where it looks like a bad throw because it's like down in the way, but then you realize the safety's coming in. It's like the only place you can put the ball where the pass catcher isn't going to get absolutely smashed and where he can actually catch the ball without getting the ball dislodged. And it's like Caleb Williams is like, if I get it in the vicinity of my guy, I've done my job. And so there's still like a lot of NFL steps to take before we have, because Caleb Williams, if he keeps working well with Ben Johnson, like a year from now, we're going to be paying $7,200 for him every week, $7,500 for him every week. But there's just like things that he's doing wrong that are preventing those games from showing up. So yeah, I'm fine with Caleb Williams. Early in the week, I was just sort of auto building some rosters with him because like, oh yeah, like you see the green 28th next to his name in the app where it's like, oh yeah, he's 27th. Like he's playing against the Saints. They've given up points to quarterbacks. But then when you really think about the game environment, the matchup, how Caleb has played, I'm not probably as high on it as some others, but it's still like in the mix. I'd say he's probably like my 7th or 8th quarterback. And to be clear, like this is a week where I've counted 13 different quarterbacks who have popped in the Sims on my end. So like there's a lot of different ways to build. So I'm not saying he's a bad play. I'm just saying like on a week with lots of quarterback options, he might not make my tightest pool this week.
Gotcha. How about some of these other kind of rushing quarterbacks? You touched on Drake, Maye, kind of a fun angle as far as you mentioned that with Vrabel potentially running up the score there against his former team. You get Justin Fields without Garrett Wilson, which certainly makes that less enticing. Daniel Jones, Bo Nix, Dart, some of these guys that have the rushing juice, but are maybe a little harder to stack. I know one of them we might save for the lineup build, but any other thoughts on some of these guys? And let's go ahead and include Jalen Hurts in there as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'll isolate Drake Maye and just say, I think obviously, who do you stack him with, right? Because none of these guys are playing a lot of snaps. Diggs is still kind of in this 50% range. Booty's a little bit above that 50% range. Booty, a guy I kept highlighting last week and being like, he's playing the most snaps out of any Patriots wide receiver. I didn't end up playing him on my single entry 3 max last week, but you get this like understanding of like Booty in 6 games, right? Booty has hit twice. Diggs has hit twice. Hunter Henry has hit once. Rhamondre Stevenson has hit once. That's 6. And it's all been in different games, right? So like somebody from the Patriots is going to pop in this one for a really nice game. It's just a guessing game as to who that will be. It probably will be one of those 4. But yeah, I think that Drake Maye is very interesting this week because I do think there are times where we can lean into the narrative. Look at the David Montgomery going back to Cincinnati, right? He gets a passing touchdown. He's getting the goal line work. Look at when A.J. Brown went back to play Tennessee. We talked about it a lot that week of like, yeah, A.J. Brown's unpredictable in his usage, but Nick Sirianni's the type of coach who's going to be like, let's get A.J. Brown some big plays here. Mike Vrabel's the type of coach who's going to want to run up the score here if he can. Josh McDaniels has a history of running up the score, so he's comfortable calling a game like that. Patriots player, like Vrabel's the type of coach that players love as they play for him, so they're going to want to go put up a big game here. So yeah, I mean, I think that this is an interesting spot for Drake Maye. Jalen Hurts, not for me necessarily, but again, I can see it. It's a pretty wide open quarterback slate. Again, Jayden and Dak are like head and shoulders above the others in terms of raw projection, but you can see lots of different ways they can play out. Justin Fields, I think that we'll stop after Justin Fields and just move on to other stuff, but I'm a little concerned about the game environment because the Carolina defense has been so good. We've been talking about it all year, right? I've been saying like the Carolina run defense is much better than people think. Turns out they're much better than I even thought. I kept being like, they're not bad anymore. Like they're not good, but they're not bad. And it's like, they're actually pretty good, right? And then the Jets defense actually is starting to look better, which when a defense looks so bad early in the year, but they have a lot of talented pieces and it's a defense that people expected to be pretty solid. And then they start rounding into form. We have to take that somewhat seriously, right? Steve Wilkes, Aaron Glenn, good defensive coaches there, good defensive personnel. So I don't know that I necessarily see this turning into a high-scoring game with no Garrett Wilson and with this good Panthers run defense. So Justin Fields is one where, as of last night, I was finally like, you know what, he's not going to be on my tighter builds. But again, it took up until Thursday night for me to kind of cut him off that list of tighter builds on a week with lots of quarterbacks sort of in the mix for me. So I'm not like strongly arguing against him. Same thing with Caleb Williams. I'm not strongly arguing against him. Just like you do have to pull in a tighter pool for yourself at some point. And so I guess it's worth clarifying that this week. Like all these things I'm saying here are like, there's a lot of viable quarterback options this week. And so it's taking me deep into the week to be like, okay, my tighter pool is probably this, right? That doesn't necessarily mean I have strong stances against some of these other guys. It's just like, okay, here's where I'm going to cut out guys. Here's where I'm going to go. And like historically, what that means is I'm going to have like 6 quarterbacks in my pool and 4 of them will do really well. And 2 others that obviously they're on my tighter pool, so I expect them to do really well. They're not, right? And 1 or 2 guys not in my pool are going to do really well. Like I'm not going to get everything right. I'm going to get closer than most of our competition, but never 100% or almost never 100%. And so it's like, yeah, if there's a quarterback you like that I'm like, nah, he's not in my tighter pool. I wouldn't take that in as like a huge data point to worry about. It's the sort of week where it's pretty wide open at quarterback. So I know my pool will be sharp. I also know my pool almost certainly won't be perfect. And so, yeah, that's sort of where I'm at with some of these plays we're talking about.
All right, we will move on to running back here. Thanks to everybody hanging out in the chat. See some good conversation going on with some of these plays. If you guys are new to the channel, please subscribe. We're here every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, doing multiple shows on both the DraftKings slate and the Underdog slate. And if you are subscribed, hitting that like button helps us out. Please do so while we move over to the running back position. And I would say this week is kind of interesting, JM, in that I feel like it's a little more wide open at running back too. You know, these previous weeks, we've had just like such a clear top tier of values. This week, obviously no CMC, no Bijan, no some of these like go-tos here. And so I would say wide open as far as places you can go here. What are you seeing at the top end for running back?
Yeah, not just wide open, but also the last 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, I was like, oh, I got a pretty big running back pool, and I spent a bunch of time trying to narrow it down. And then it turned out that like you could throw a dart at any of those running backs. There was like some people that people mentioned, they're like, oh, well, I didn't have this guy, so I didn't. And I'm like, neither did I. But I had Bijan Robinson, who was low owned 3 weeks ago, and I had Bucky Irving, who was low owned 3 weeks ago, and they both put up 29, 30 plus, right? It's like there were so many running backs who hit 3 weeks ago that it was like, if you had a sharp pool, you were getting good running back scores. And then the last 2 weeks, I basically said, I kind of think it's going to be the same thing, right? Like there's so many good running backs. Get a good pool, mix and match them, play a lot of Rico Dowdle, and you're probably going to come away with some really strong running back scores. This week, it's like, are there going to be a lot of good running back scores this week? I don't know. I don't necessarily think there will be, right? So I think it's a very different week than the last couple of weeks. Yeah, Jonathan Taylor at the top, obviously clearing away, top play. We just talked about earlier how these offenses are structured, how they play, right? So what we expect is for the Colts to get into the red zone against the Chargers a decent number of times. When they're in the red zone, like Jonathan Taylor is a big part of that. If they're scoring from outside the red zone, he's the likeliest guy to be scoring from outside the red zone on a long run. So I think, the thing I don't like about an 8,800 price tag for a guy who's heavily dependent on touchdowns is the down games can be these, 14 pointers, these 12 pointers, whatever they might be. But we got to take that, we got to take that on this particular week. So Jonathan Taylor has not been like my favorite way to attack a slate. It's the same thing as Saquon was last year, though. Like Saquon, would get 4 or 5 points through the air, sometimes 6 points, occasionally a little bit more than that. But you're really just saying, hopefully he gets the yards and the touchdowns. And I think this is a good spot for JT to get the yards and the touchdowns. So at 8,800, he's not a guy that you have to be like, I got to force him in, but he's very much in the mix this week and a very strong play. And like, I was looking while we were talking to like one of my Mahomes rosters I built last night was Mahomes and Rashee Rice and Jonathan Taylor. So, okay, all 3 of these guys will be popular, but like you said, like the combinatorial ownership on Mahomes plus Rashee Rice is going to be immense. So how do you do something different on that roster? Well, how many Mahomes, Rashee Rice rosters are going to have the salary to be able to play Jonathan Taylor? So yes, all 3 of them are high owned. How many rosters have all 3 of them together? And then we say, what if Taylor puts up 35 and no other running back tops 22, 23? What if Mahomes and Rashee Rice is the top quarterback wide receiver combo and nobody else has that 3-player combo, right? So those are some of the things that we can look to do on a Mahomes roster, some of the things we can look to do with Jonathan Taylor. But yeah, I think he's a sharp play. I think he's overpriced relative to expectations, but so are a lot of other skill position players on this slate. So that makes him like very much in the mix this week for kind of like being a core part of builds.
Is Jacobs close to JT for you at all? Kind of a similar setup that he had last week versus the Bengals.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's sort of the perception here. Like you watch these games, you keep seeing Emmanuel Wilson come on the field, like the Josh Jacobs is not as central to his offense as Jonathan Taylor is to his offense. Also, we look through Josh Jacobs' game logs, right? And we start from the start of the year, we got 14, 14.4, 12.4, 31.7, and 32. Awesome. Who were those games against? Dallas and Cincinnati. Like, take away Miami, like those are the other two defenses that we would most want to attack with running backs. And so I think that these scores should be taken with a grain of salt. I think the 7,800 price tag should be considered through the lens of like, what's this range of outcomes? So yeah, no, I think Jacobs is very viable. I think that his viability is probably going to be overstated by projections and by the field. I would say I like Saquon Barkley next to him just as much and at likely lower ownership because if you're going to get on track in the run game, like this would be the matchup to do it, particularly because like the way that Minnesota attacks and the way that they leave gaps open, like Saquon can one cut and go against this defense. Like it's a type of defense where he could have some long runs. So I think both these guys are like, I really don't want to pay up for them. I might pay up for them a little bit, like both of them, but I do think that Saquon's in the conversation. I think that Jacobs is being like, I think his likelihood of hitting is being overstated this week. And I think that Saquon's likelihood of hitting is probably going to be understated by the field. But yeah, both of them are guys that I feel okay about this week.
Let me ask you about what I envision being kind of the chalk trio at running back. Obviously, Javonte Williams in that game that everybody's excited about. Quinshon Judkins, who gets a Miami team that just got torched by Kamani Vidal and Rico Dowdle in back-to-back weeks. And then Breece Hall is kind of an interesting one. He's projecting decently. I don't know how excited people are to play anyone on the Jets, so I might take the lower on his ownership. But what do you think about those three value options?
Yeah, the Breece Hall one, it was just last night that I was looking at ownership, and it was like, oh, how about that? He's literally not in my pool. And what I said in my journal was, I don't think he's necessarily a bad play. It's just like he didn't pop to me as one of the better plays on the slate. And so and again, like I have a lot of respect for this Panthers run defense right now. Look what they did to Achane. Look what they did to Javonte. And so when I look at the ownership in a spot like that, where I don't love the player and he's going to be high owned, I just take that as edge and treat it as like over time, I'm going to come out ahead if I don't like a player and he's high owned. So that doesn't mean he can't hit, but he's going to like, he's a home run hitter. And that's what he's going to need to do is hit some home runs. Cause I think on a down to down basis, this offense doesn't set up well in this spot. Now, if they were to bench Justin Fields and play Tyrod Taylor, notice I said it the way Baker wants you to say it, Tyrod. If they were to bench Justin Fields and play Tyrod Taylor, then I might be like, hey, maybe this offense can get something going. Still no Garrett Wilson though, but yeah. So Breece, not one that I'm on. You said, Javonte. Yeah. So Washington was a really good run. I mean, Washington shut down Bijan Robinson, like, or slowed him down. Like Washington's a really good run defense. And maybe they didn't slow him down. Maybe he ended up having a big game there, but they were doing well against him. I think he averaged like 3.8 yards a carry, something like that, and then maybe put up some touchdowns. But Washington has a good run defense, and then DeAndre Swift torched them last week. But while I was watching that game, what I kept thinking was I was watching it like through the lens of, okay, the Cowboys are playing them this week, and it was like Swift kept hitting the hole so quickly, and it was like, I don't think Javonte can do that. Like all of his big runs were because of how quick he got through the hole, and that's not really Javonte's game. So I don't think this sets up as a great spot for Javonte, and I don't like the price tag on a guy that I've kept comping to James Conner, right? He's like the new James Conner that you play him because the floor is going to be so consistent due to the usage, and he's not going to break off a ton of big plays, but like the usage is going to be there. The score, typically 16, 22 points, occasionally 28 to 30. At 6,700, I kind of want more than that, but also like I might bet on this game environment enough that I'll still have the Javonte plays mixed in. So that's how I'm seeing him. Quinshon Judkins. All right.
Yeah.
To me, right now, I just am playing him on 100% of my rosters and simplifying my week a little bit.
Okay.
So, like the Miami run defense is so outrageously bad. I'm going to read off these DraftKings point totals for RB1s against him. 26.7 Jonathan Taylor. That's low for Jonathan Taylor, but let's keep going down the line. 21.2 next for Rhamondre Stevenson. With no touchdowns scored, 21.2 DraftKings points for Rhamondre Stevenson in this matchup, 23.8 for James Cook, 16.1 for Breece Hall, 35.4 for Rico Dowdle, 25.8 for Kamani Vidal without an offensive line. We know how the Browns want to play offense. We know they want to run the ball. Also, like Kevin Stefanski is a 2-time coach of the year. We can say what we want about that award, whatever. But like part of it's because he brings a really good offense, right? It's like this Kubiak style offense. Used to work with Kubiak in Minnesota. It's this like they're stretching the defense horizontally. And I always love these offenses. Again, like Kingsbury, similar in this, like you're always, are we going right? Are we going left? Are we going right? Are we going left? And then you go up the middle and then you throw the ball to the left, and then you throw the ball to the right, and you're like, I think of it like you're loosening up the defense, and then you just have these opportunities for this big play, because the defense is always like, which way are we going? Where are things flowing? And Dillon Gabriel fits this system really well to where like he's able to just get the ball out quickly, throw the ball over the middle, throw the ball short to the right, to the left. And then Quinshon Judkins has looked so good. His rushing prop is 95.5 rushing yards. That's outrageous. I don't think I've ever seen that. Like Breece Hall's at 67.5 rushing yards. Jonathan Taylor's at 88.5 rushing yards. Saquon Barkley's at 73.5 rushing yards. Quinshon Judkins' rushing prop is 95.5. So they're saying, sports books, they've got a stake in this. And they're like, all right, there's at least a 50% chance that he goes for 96 or more rushing yards. And then we get the bonus. And if the Browns score 2 or 3 touchdowns against the Dolphins, which I think they do, he's probably getting one of those, possibly 2. So there have been other players in the past that I've been like, I'm just locking this guy this week, or mostly locking this guy this week. Like Josh Allen against the Eagles a couple of years ago, where they ended up having that shootout, or Justin Fields, the first time that he really popped for like a 40 plus, 50 plus point game, whatever it was. This isn't like that. This isn't one where it's like, oh, he's going to run away with this slate and you had to have him. It's more like it's a tight slate for pricing. He's cheap. There's a lot of question marks at running back. To me, he's the top running back play. Also, he's coming in a slightly lower in projections as like in terms of GPP value, when you sort things that way of like point per dollar. He's coming in as like the 4th, 5th, 6th running back in a lot of projections because that game total is dropping because of the weather. And so game totals are a big part of projections, but the sports books aren't dinging him. They're still like, hey, 95.5 rushing yards for Quinshon Judkins. So yeah, it's not one of these where I'm like, it's not one of these where I think he's going to end up being a must play on this slate, to be clear. It's more like there's a lot of uncertainty at running back, and there's a lot of uncertainty on where we spend salary, and he's one of the cheapest viable guys. So it's like, I think on a low end, we get like 16 points from him. On a high end, we get 28 to 30, and I'll take that range every time on this particular slate. So yeah, I'm personally just simplifying my week by playing Quinshon Judkins on literally every roster right now is how I'm looking at things.
All right, there you go. That does certainly simplify things. Let me ask you about another kind of sub tier of running backs. And I mean, feel free to only talk about the ones that interest you here. Bill, of course, in that same game of the week there on the Commanders. DeAndre Swift, we mentioned we are keeping tabs on that Q tag. And then Kamani Vidal, still only 5,500 after having a pretty big game last week. Thoughts on any of those guys? Yeah,
I'll hit them all quickly. I'll go from the bottom up. Vidal, he and Hassan Haskins split snaps in the first quarter last week. And then Vidal, they said they were going to ride the hot hand. They ended up riding Vidal. It was against Miami. Still a bad, beat up offensive line, not the best spot. I did say a couple weeks ago, like Vidal was the practice squad guy, but he was the lead back, right? Haskins was there for special teams. I think I said that on this show. And then the Chargers kind of pumped the brakes on that. It was like, yeah, they're both going to get their opportunities. And it was like, oh, okay. So I do think they have been viewing him as the guy they want to ride in this situation, but I don't love the spot or the matchup. I think at his price tag, he's fine. DeAndre Swift, we're still, he's Kyle Monunga is part of the mix. He's still like, I don't know, you get a big game and then people want to jump on him. His workload didn't change, so the rest of his game is kind of this 10 to 15 point range. That's still how I view DeAndre Swift. I think he's a guy who can pop for 25 plus points. Like I probably played Swift more than anybody else over the last 4 or 5 years, because I'm always like, well, he can put up these 25 to 30 pointers. It's just that they're kind of rare, and so I don't think that him posting the same thing I said about Hunter Henry when he hit for 29 a few weeks ago. Like the week leading up to that, another one where I didn't end up playing Hunter Henry, but all week I kept being like, Hunter Henry can pop for big games. He does it. Everybody wants to play him the next week. And it's like, no, he can pop for big games. Just because he did it doesn't mean he's doing it the next week. Nothing's changed for DeAndre Swift. So to me, throw out last week and then ask, psychologically, do you still want to play him? And then Bill Krosky-Merritt, this is one that I'm like all over the place on, because like Jayden's going to get his 8 to 12 carries. You're really not going to see more than 16 carries for Bill, 16, 17. Then it's like, well, that's in like the likeliest way for this to play out. But there are outlier scenarios where he ends up with like 23 touches, right? We know that Chris Rodriguez is, I think, trending toward not playing. And even if he's playing, like what I was saying from the start of the season, like they didn't trade Brian Robinson Jr. because they suddenly fell in love with Chris Rodriguez. It's because they liked Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. And then they throw that in my face by like not giving Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt the backfield after Austin Eckler gets hurt. And then like over time, they're like, no, but this is what we planned to do, right? So he is the lead back. doesn't have a big schemed pass game role. Jayden doesn't check the ball down a lot because he doesn't need to. He can run instead. So like the passing work isn't there. You're betting on yardage and touchdowns, and you're probably betting on him getting there on like 14 to 16 to 17 carries. So it's hard to get that 100-yard bonus with that setup. But like I said, like A, he can do it in this matchup. B, there are scenarios in which this game plays out sort of weird and he ends up with 23 plus carries. So I think he's definitely going to be on some of my rosters, on some of my single entry 3 max. Is he going to be a core piece? I don't think so, but he's going to be in the mix for me. So yeah, he's like, if I'm choosing among 5 running backs, he's probably in that pool. But I haven't been able to like vault him up sort of that top tier, you know, which I'd like to do in this game environment at his price tag. And I like him as a player. I love the matchup, but right now he's sort of like in this pool of guys behind Quinshon Judkins for me.
Before we move on to wide receiver, I want to make sure there aren't any other running backs you really want to highlight. I know I've kind of fed you the ones I was curious on. Obviously, some sleepers down there, some of the more kind of like 2-down plotters who could have some touchdown equity. You mentioned Pacheco, saw the chat talking about Mason, J.K. Dobbins, kind of interesting. Rhamondre may be interesting. Anything else that stands out to you, or even ones I didn't mention?
Yeah, Rhamondre I think is really interesting because he had, I think it was 72% or 76% of the snaps last week. And Tennessee is a great rushing matchup. And the Patriots have been bad at running the ball, but that doesn't mean they're going to stay bad at running the ball. Like, given their offensive line, given their play calling, given their scheme, they should actually be good at running the ball. And Rhamondre is a pretty good running back. And so, I could see this being a spot where nobody's really thinking about him and he ends up putting up 22 to 25 DraftKings points. I don't think that necessarily means he's separating, but on a slate like this, well, like last week, if you got onto Kamani Vidal, it didn't give you much edge, right? Because lots of other running backs hit. And you got 25 points that didn't like run away with the slate. Yeah, you got it at a cheaper price tag. But this week, we might not get a lot of big running back scores. And so if you were to get the low owned 22 to 25 pointer, then there's like significant edge in that. So I think Rhamondre, the risk is worth taking on because of the state of the running back options as a whole. So yeah, Rhamondre is in the mix for me. Pacheco in the mix for me. I don't mind taking J.K. Dobbins. I don't mind taking swings on some of these guys this week.
Yep. All right, let's move on to wide receiver. Before we do, had a nice comment in the chat here from Mathology saying, I appreciate the hard work, JM. The journal on Discord has become a must read and helps us underdog drafters to start thinking about the decision points on the slate a lot earlier in the week. Yeah, a lot of the guys who are chasing that dog bowl qualifier, the live final, they're in there early week before projections are out. And so, you know, you're formulating your own take. So Mathology shouting out the journal, and Joey asking the question, does the journal require a sub to 1 week season? Yes, it does. You can get 40% off all Inner Circle and 1 week season subs right now with promo code Pete40. Any other promos on the site this week that people should know about?
I don't think so. No, what we are rolling. Yeah, there's something I don't remember what it is, but we're rolling out. Props for NBA and Bink Machine Optimizer for NBA. Which is only $20 a month. So I mean, it's really one of the best optimizers out there. Built by FTN, built by Nickelback for Life, Caleb Nelson, who Millie Maker winner, built this optimizer himself off of like what he wanted to use. Won a Millie Maker with it. Now he works with FTN and. The NBA Bink Machine is basically like we don't have a big NBA audience. So we just want to make this available for $20 a month just so that people who are playing, they get access to projections, ownership projections, optimizer, $20 a month. So if you play NBA, it's a pretty good deal there as well. And then, yeah, the journal's been awesome because, the last few years, I wasn't writing up all the games anymore, but I was still writing up my DFS interpretations in the game. And it was very structured around like, okay, like here's my high level thoughts on each game. And this year we were like, man, like we already have other guys writing up the high level thoughts on each game. It's pretty redundant that I'm doing this. So the journal's allowed me to freelance a little bit more and just think through the slate. So most weeks from Monday night onward, I'm popping stuff in there. Early thoughts on the slate, developing my thoughts around the slate, the game environments, the matchups, what's standing out to me. And so, it's been really fun because it's different. And it's been, I think, a lot more valuable for me and for users because I am just constantly developing my thoughts in there throughout the week. And so we're able to see that thought process flow out and kind of, you can take branches along the way as well. Like, okay, JM moved off this one, but I actually really like this one. Maybe that's the one that hits this week. And so, shout out to the journal and glad that people have been enjoying that this year. I've certainly been enjoying it myself.
Is there just real quick logistically for people who are wanting, because the Discord, what is the process? Once you're a sub within your account, you have the link to unlock the Discord and then see that
Yeah.
channel?
So you have an email on this, and you can always reach out to support. But if you're an Inner Circle sub, you basically just go to your profile page on OWS, and then you can press the connect with Discord button. And what that does is it connects your account to the Discord, and that channel will show up. And then also all the journal entries go into the scroll on Friday mornings. Maybe it's Saturday mornings. You can check and see if they're in there right now. But then I also am still popping stuff in there Friday. Okay, so everything goes in there Friday morning, but I continue to pop stuff in there Friday night, Saturday night while I'm building. And so it's best to just be in Discord and have full access as things are coming out.
There you go. All right, let's talk some wide receiver here. We have two of the most popular plays are going to be guys returning that we haven't seen in a while. CeeDee Lamb, of course, Rashee Rice. It's a little hard to have the Deebo conversation right now, just with that kind of up in the air. But let's talk with some of these popular plays here at the high end. What are you thinking about Lamb and Rice?
Well, I want to talk about wide receiver in the context of what else is available, because you look outside of the popular options, and it's not just that the popular options are solid options, but there aren't a lot of other solid options on the slate. Like, what do we want to do? Tedrow and McMillan against Sauce Gardner. I think Jalen Waddle against Cleveland is viable, but there's still weather concern and a good defense, and there's question marks there. Do we want to go AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, where it's like, well, Minnesota plays a lot of man coverage, and Philadelphia can actually hit in this spot because, yeah, Minnesota's a complicated defense, but Philly's in a simple offense, and so maybe this helps. And it's like we got to really start taking extra creative steps to come up with why and how some of these other plays are good plays. Doesn't mean that some of these other plays won't hit, but it's a unique week where, like, if CeeDee Lamb comes back and has his same target share in this spot, does he pay off his price tag? I don't know, but he's going to put up a really solid game. Rashee Rice, I think we see Rashee Rice at 7,300 deeper into the season. That's my target price for him. So then I look at him as, it's his first game back, and also from like a knee injury as well. But like, he's been practicing. He should be up to speed. He should be all systems go. And I think that Kansas City wants to feature what they're going to look like, strike some fear into the hearts of their future opponents with the big game here, right? And so, like, Rashee Rice, a guy who I think should be 7,300, he's 5,600. I think that there's such a natural tendency for DFS players, and probably there was a period in my DFS evolution as a player where I would have been like, these guys are so popular, we got to find a different way to play it. But it's like, honestly, these plays are the best plays, and I'm not too worried about the ownership here, because I just look at what I can do on a roster differently from the field in terms of how I'm putting things together, or the angles that I'm taking, what stacks I'm building around, whatever it might be, or like the Mahomes, with Jonathan Taylor type thing. Like, there's ways to do things differently with a roster and still have that clear path to first place. So that's kind of how I'm looking at these guys this week. Other guys who I think kind of stand out as like just really strong plays: Cortland Sutton, Quinton Johnston. Quinton Johnston probably a tier below Cortland Sutton, because I want to see it like a little bit more, right? We had 4 games where he was sort of featured in this offense. Then the offensive line injuries, they're throwing the ball shorter now. Quinton Johnston coming back from injury, so maybe a little bit more iffy on Quinton Johnston. But Cortland Sutton, when he's not getting his 2-pointers, he's putting up like 18 to 20 something. So I think that there's some solid wide receiver options, and then it falls off pretty quickly this week.
Yeah. What about if people are looking for value? We always talk about too, when you're like, if we have all these injuries to the Commanders, if people are trying to find unique ways to get into that Dallas game, I guess Dallas is pretty concentrated now with all the big guys back. But what about the Commanders? Is there like some Chris Moore? I saw Luke McCaffrey mentioned in the chat earlier. Is there anything creative you can do down there?
Yeah, well, first off, I think that we should compare these price tags down here to the cheap tight ends, right? Like, how are the Jets going to move the ball? To move the ball, they're going to throw the ball to Mason Taylor a decent amount. Like, it's hard to see him not getting 5 catches, and he's 3,400. If David Njoku's out, Harold Fannin's probably
He is out. We just got that news.
Well, there we go. Like, Harold Fannin's going to be heavily involved in that game. Zach Ertz, we already talked about. Like, and all these guys are sub 4K. And yes, they're not going to hit like the sexy downfield plays, but they're going to have like 5, 6, 7 catches, and that piles up, and then they can add a touchdown. Like, any of these guys can score 18 DraftKings points. And typically when you're getting below 4K at wide receiver, you're crossing your fingers and you're basically saying, like, this guy has a role and a skill set to where once or twice per season, he's going to hit for 20 points. And if lightning strikes and I land on him on the right week, that's going to help my roster a ton, because I'm paying so little for a 20-point score. And it's like, well, like you can project these tight ends like within their reasonable range of outcomes to hit 20 points sometimes. So I do think that there's a lot of viability just going down at tight end, even double tight end builds on a week where we don't have a plethora of really high confidence running back plays, right? The last few weeks, it was like, boy, I don't want to use a tight end in the flex because that takes away my chance to have 3 of these running backs. Whereas this week, it's like, I don't know that I want 3 of these running backs. I don't need to force it. And so I can go double tight end. But yeah, I think the Commanders, I don't want to get too deep into this one because I just need to keep thinking about it through the weekend. But again, like if Deebo plays, I don't necessarily see like the spillover of a ton of targets because I don't think that the Commanders necessarily become like, oh, it's a high scoring game, therefore they throw it 45 times. I think it's a high scoring game and they're still throwing it ideally for them, their typical like 25 to 32 times. And that doesn't create a ton of spillover because you're going to have 4 or 5 targets for running backs. You're going to have 10 targets for tight ends as a whole, right? Because it'll be Ertz plus a little bit on some other guys. You're going to have 7, 8 targets for Deebo Samuel. And all of a sudden you're sitting at like, 10 targets left for the rest of the guys. So yeah, I think that it's viable. Chris Moore played the most snaps, but that's probably more a function of they like him in this offense for what he does for spacing, what he does for blocking, whatever else. I don't think that necessarily means they like him more as a pass catcher than Jalen Lane or Luke McCaffrey. And so, yeah, I think that you're really throwing darts if Deebo plays. If Deebo's out, then we have to reassess everything. And I haven't really spent much brain power on that because there have been other things to spend brain power on to this point. So I don't want to speak on that too early, but I'll dig into that. If Deebo's out, I'll start digging into that, throughout the weekend.
Yeah, I want to make sure we don't run out of time for everything. And you mentioned kind of the tight end stuff. I guess just real quick on wide receiver, you mentioned QJ. There's been a lot of comments about Colts wide receivers. One of the news we got before we went live, I believe Doolin is out in addition to Josh Downs. I've seen a lot of Alec Pierce mentions. No one excited about Michael Pittman Jr. apparently. You mentioned QJ. Anything else in that Chargers-Colts game that interests you for wide receivers?
No. Okay. Did Doolin get hurt rushing the quarterback? Do you know that Lou Anarumo put him on a blitz recently?
Really?
Yeah, just put him on defense. It's like, hey, go get the quarterback. Yeah, I'm interested in what the Colts are going to do because Downs plays strictly in the slot. So I think we just see like more 2 tight end sets from them, and then we get Pittman and Pierce on the outside, especially because Doolin, like just in terms of how he profiles, seems to be a guy they could have put in the slot. No, I'm not really like nothing in that game that I'm chasing at the wide receiver position outside of QJ.
I guess one other just game environment that's kind of interesting because of the wide receiver firepower would be Eagles and Vikings. Obviously, AJ Brown, Devontae, Addison, Jefferson. Any love there? That game environment just not speaking to you?
No, it's not speaking to me. But when Quinshon Mitchell looked like he was going to miss, like I just started building a ton of Justin Jefferson roster, like JJ plus CD Lamb. You're like, oh, this is really fun, And then Quinshon Mitchell's playing, which like literally does not mean that Justin Jefferson can't hit. It's just like the chance of him going for 30, 35 become pretty low, So yeah. I think JJ's viable in this realm of like, well, he'll probably get you 20 and he's good enough to get you a big score, but nothing that you can feel comfortable projecting in that spot. And then same thing, like I said, you could say, the superpower of the Vikings is how complicated they are on defense, but the Eagles, they don't really change plays at the line of scrimmage. They don't do a lot of different things. They're just like, hey, we're either going to run the ball with Saquon a few different ways, or we're going to throw the ball to these 2 guys on some pretty simple basic routes. So I don't think that the Vikings are as likely to trip up. Like what makes the Vikings special on defense doesn't really throw off the Eagles the way it would some other teams. But also the Eagles have just looked broken, and oftentimes that doesn't just change in 1 week. And so I think it's totally viable to take swings on cheap AJ Brown, but I haven't been able to bring myself to really get there on my builds yet this week.
We can do tight end real quickly here, so we have time to build a lineup, and we've already hit on a few of the really nice plays. Obviously, Ertz, if Deebo's out, and even if he's not out, really nice spot there. You mentioned some of these lower guys who are going to get targets. Mason Taylor. I don't know if you've mentioned Michael Maye yet. He's in line for a nice target share there. Any other gold star tight end plays you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, the 3 I really like below 4K are the 3 guys I mentioned. And then you got Evan Ingram at 4K. I think he's very interesting the way he's being used. And then, you've got Tyler Warren, Trey McBride. I like McBride the most out of kind of these high-priced guys, but you can viably consider Tyler Warren. You can certainly consider Jake Ferguson. I know people always like to make a case for Tucker Kraft, low volume, but, yards after the catch and all that. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can go at tight end. You can throw Kelsey on the Mahomes stack and see if that kind of differentiates that stack a little bit with Rashee Rice or without Rashee Rice. So there's a lot of different places to go at tight end. To me, my main focus is these cheaper guys because I think it's a really clear way to open up salary on a roster. But I also I don't mind getting up to McBride or playing Ferguson in a I won't play Ferguson as a one-off, but playing him with a quarterback from that game, betting on, the touchdowns flowing to him. So I've built different types of rosters around tight end, but most of my focus has been these cheaper guys because I do think there's edge in just we can play two cheaper guys and get 25 to 30 points between them. And you think about if you're paying $7,500 in salary, we're talking about CeeDee Lamb probably doesn't get up to 30 plus, but he can get you 20 plus. Well, if we're pairing two of these cheap tight ends paying around $7K in salary and you get 25 between them, that's great. And they're capable of putting up 30 to 35 between them, if things all break the right way. So I think it's just a good way to go this week is looking at those cheaper tight ends.
Yep. I like it as well here. CPA saying any 1 week specials for this week. We were talking about it a little bit earlier. You can get 40% off any of the Inner Circle and DFS subs with Pete 40, or if you just want to do the weekly pass, that promo code Pete will always get you 20% off. And then be sure to check out the NBA stuff if you're into that as well. Joe, JM was talking
we've been doing
earlier.
Different 1 week specials most weeks. I think this week we don't have anything, but I could be wrong on that. So go to the site and check it out just in case I'm wrong. Aaron and I didn't get a chance to have a call this week because I was so busy with work plus life plus DFS and all this. So this is the first week of the season where I just felt overwhelmed in terms of not enough hours in the week. But so there might be some specials that I don't know about, but I'm pretty sure that this week we don't have any, and then I'm sure we'll have something else next week.
All right. It's time. I wanted to make sure we had a good chunk of time here to build up our lineup here. JM was teasing what we were going to do here before the show, and excited for that. So without further ado, let's get our building blocks ready. All right, you were, behind the scenes, you said, are these vomit stacks too gross? Are people going to be repulsed? And I said, bring it on, because people get mad if they get repulsed by chalk picks too. So you can't win.
True. That's true. Yeah.
Perfect. Then everyone says, hey, I built that lineup before the show started. And so you literally, you can't win no matter what you do.
Yeah. Nobody built this lineup before the show started. They might have. Okay. So we talked at the top about I've had 13 different. So what I do throughout the week, an early week sims or whatever, right? Because there's sometimes I set aside a roster because it had 200+% ROI, and by the time we get to Sunday morning, it's coming in at negative 80% ROI. Because as we get more information on projections, on ownership projections on the week, whatever, sims change. But throughout the week, any roster I have that projects for 200+% ROI in large field tournaments, I just set it aside in a one bucket labeled 200+. In that bucket right now, there are 13 different quarterbacks. There are lots of different ways that we can build on this particular slate for positive ROI. So I want to talk about that really quickly before we get this stack in here. And so it's basically this understanding of yes, Jayden is the highest raw projected points play, maybe Dak, whatever, right? But if they get to 26, 27, 28 instead of 32, 35, 38, then all of a sudden any other quarterback who's also getting kind of that 4x salary. So that means a Dylan Gabriel getting up to 18 points is as valuable and maybe even more valuable than, now we're not playing Dylan Gabriel on this. We got the weather concerns. Pizza, that would be too disgusting for the audience. But I do like Dylan Gabriel this week. That could actually be more valuable because you're getting him plus Fannin plus Quinshon Judkins. They're scoring 60+ points. It ends up getting you more than 4x their salary. And you have a very different salary construction than the field. You now have Jonathan Taylor and CeeDee Lamb on this roster together, which is a combination that most people won't have. If both of those players go for 30+, people don't have those two players together, right? And so there is a lot of value in just building with a cheaper guy this week and hoping you get that 4x. So what we're going to do here is a Bone Nix and Cortland Sutton stack. And I got to go back and make sure that this is accurate. So they cost 11.5K combined, which means our target score for 4x is 46 points. I was looking through this earlier in the week, and I couldn't find it in my notes this morning, so I got to go back and find it again. But I believe it was in 8 of their last 16 games, they've scored about 40 or more combined points, these two together, which is pretty incredible. That's 50% of the time that they're getting close to that 4x salary multiplier. So in a spot where in New York, in Denver, this is not a good spot for the Giants offense against this Denver defense, given like what has made the Giants offense good and exciting recently, what makes the Denver defense good. So this is a spot where I could see the Broncos stomping on the Giants. And what we love about this is Sean Payton is happy to stomp on an opponent. Bo Nix's one big game this year was a 28-3 win against Cincinnati. We go back to last year, there were plenty of these games where Bo Nix hit in blowout wins. I think it was like 3 of his 6 bigger games last year were in blowout wins. And so, this is a spot where Bo Nix has not looked like late season Bo Nix from last year so far. He is missing a ton of throws, but they're willing to roll him out all the time and throw the ball downfield. So the opportunities are there for these points to pile up. And what this is going to do is going to free up our salary to kind of do something differently in the field. I'm going to throw Evan Ingram on here because we do have 50 plus combined points between these 3 guys in 2 of their last 3 games. We need about 60 from these 3 guys to really get there, but I think they can do it in this spot. So, and this gives us a really nice setup. We're saving salary already. And then let's throw in a defense. So we just have a feel, because I do want to throw in a higher priced defense this week, like Patriots and above is where I'm looking at defense. I don't even mind throwing the Broncos defense on here because you're basically just telling the story of this Broncos smash. And we've seen these types of tournaments these types of rosters win tournaments before because people don't like to play something like this, but it actually makes sense in the context of this setup. So Pete, I'll leave it up to you. We can throw the Patriots, the Broncos, the Chiefs in on this one, whichever one you want to go with here.
Let's I like the Patriots here. Why don't we toss the Patriots in play? If we're going to get a little Vrabel revenge, we can get it through the defense here. So we got Bo Nix, Cortland Sutton, Ingram. I assume obviously nothing we want to touch here with the Giants. Pretty brutal.
No need. Yep. The bet here is Broncos stomp, right? If they don't stomp, this probably doesn't work, right? And so the bet here is Broncos stomp. And if they stomp and just try to keep scoring points, which they're, again, very happy and willing to do, then this ends up being the stack that ends up winning tournaments, or at least that gets us to 4x, 4.5x our salary with cheaper allocation to our stack and lots of flexibility. And so we're going to throw in Judkins after this because, again,
I was going to say Judkins
for me,
advice
just locking him in.
like
We could have started there, but
yeah.
So we're going to throw Judkins onto this roster. And then what I actually want to do next is throw in another tight end, because what I want to do is free up this salary for like a unique high priced pairing, just so that we can see what this looks like on this particular week. So at tight end, we can throw in, I don't mind throwing in Fannin and Quinshon Judkins, or we can throw in Mason Taylor and just take the savings and have as much salary flexibility as possible.
Yeah. How do you think through that? Obviously, you get like the team level correlation bet on the Browns, or do you worry, hey, part of the selling point for Fannin is they like using him around the goal line. That means Judkins isn't getting that touchdown. Do you worry about negative correlation there at all?
Yeah, no, not necessarily. Because to me personally, I think that this is a spot where I expect the Browns to do really well. I think the only thing that can hold them, like watching the Browns offense and knowing how Kevin Stefanski runs that offense, I think this is a game where if the weather cooperates, people are surprised by how competent and solid the Browns offense looks like. I think Dillon Gabriel is a small story coming out of the weekend where it's like, oh, hey, Dillon Gabriel actually looks pretty good in this Browns offense. And obviously we need the weather to cooperate, but if that's the case, I think this is a spot where we can get 3 team touchdowns with an outside shot at 4 team touchdowns here. And so there's plenty to go around, especially at these price tags. And then again, if we need the salary, we can go down to Mason Taylor on this one as well, where I think the usage is just there. But yeah, like this gives us this would actually project better in terms of the math, pairing these guys together, because we're basically making fewer bets in order to get our ceiling. We now need the Browns to score 3 or 4 touchdowns. We need the Broncos to smash, and we're humming already, just off those, getting those 2 things right. So we see that this leaves us with quite a bit of salary, and we can actually throw in Rashee Rice and then realize what we'll probably have enough for is like a CeeDee Lamb and Saquon Barkley, but we might actually have enough for a Jonathan Taylor and like something else interesting here. So if we throw in Rashee Rice on this particular roster, we're going to get up to 6,800 after we throw in Rashee Rice in our final spot. So that's not quite enough for what we want to do. But if we go down to Mason Taylor, I might have actually built this roster yesterday. If we go down to Mason Taylor, we can actually get up to George Pickens, which is a really fun way to build this roster, because you're doing something differently than the field while still making the same bets as the field on this particular roster, which is one of the easiest ways to win DFS tournaments, is to say everybody's betting on Washington and Dallas having points. We know that, CeeDee Lamb probably gets 10, 11, 12 targets, but Pickens can still get 9, even 10 targets, and people aren't going to want to play him. And so I'm like 95% sure I built this roster last night. And set it aside. It's like, hey, this is one of the ones I really like. So don't play this roster. But this is like the type of thing that we can do with this type of stack, right? Where we're getting access to this Cowboys and Commanders game through a different way. We're getting these high-priced pieces, but sort of paired in a unique way. We're getting the Bo Nix stack that's going to be less popular. And so a really nice blend of popular plays, unpopular plays, high-priced guys with high ceilings, low-priced guys who can put up 5x their salary. Just a really fun way to build on the slate. And like gives us a sense of like this slate is more wide open, I think, than it feels at first glance. Or I should say, this slate is more wide open than I think it feels at first glance for most people. I know for me at first glance, it was like, shoot, we've got Dallas and Washington. Like, what else do we even do here? And you start digging in, and it's like, oh, there's a lot of things we can do here. And this is kind of illustrative of some of the things that we can do here. So not just this, but like take this thinking and apply it to all the different ways that we can build and say, yeah, we really can do some unique things with pairing high-priced guys, getting access to this game environment, but not necessarily betting on those quarterbacks. And obviously, Pete, we could have done a Commanders-Cowboys build as well. It would have been a very sharp way to build, and we would have found some different answers and some different unique things to do. But I just wanted to illustrate, like, there are other ways to build on this slate that are very plus EV, and this is among those ways for sure.
Yeah, let me read it off here again for our audio listeners. I do always post the audio to these shows, to the In a Vacuum podcast feed. You can find them on Spotify as well if you're looking to take the show on the go. Bo Nix, Evan Ingram, and Cortland Sutton. That'll be a very unique stack, and then able to get in a lot of other high price plays here. We do the mini correlation with the Cleveland Browns, Quinshon Judkins. And actually, we went away from Fannin to Mason Taylor on this specific one. And then we get in Jonathan Taylor, Rashee Rice, George Pickens, Patriots defense here. Very solid lineup, and one that people might want to dupe it specifically because you said you might have built this roster before. But I think if you hadn't said that, people would say, Bo Nix, I think I'm okay, JM. So
that's good. Yeah, stay off it. I did just find this roster. I built it last night. So it was the third to last roster I built last night, which meant I was getting to a point where I was like, I'm feeling good about what I'm getting. Let's wind down the night. So there you go. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's lots of different ways to attack this week. This is among those ways for sure.
In one other note, I think from a macro perspective about the two tight ends this week is some weeks we've had so many good running back plays where it felt like the opportunity cost of burning your flex on the second tight end was a little too high. And it seems like this week you have the two really high price guys, some decent value, but doesn't feel like a week you have to reserve that third spot for a running back.
100%. Yeah, I'm with you there.
All right, JM, any final words here before we get ShipMyMoney on to talk some Sims and more Week 7 DFS?
Say what's up to ShipMyMoney for me, and let's all go hang out at the top of the leaderboards on Sunday.
Sounds good. Thanks again to JM. We'll be back next week, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern for the Week 8 breakdown. Until next time, JM, let's get ready for Bully the Sims. All right, ShipMyMoney joining. Are you prepared to fill the big Utica shoes on this show?
Probably not. I think this is the first time I've been nervous for a show in 8 years or something. But I'll do what I can.
No, you don't have to be nervous. You've been on lulls. You've been doing all kinds of streaming for the Run the Sims and in-game syndicate. We'll be good here. The one thing we've learned, even though it is Bully the Sims, people just want us to talk ball. They want the ball takes. They want the football takes, and I know you can do that for us.
Yeah. I can come up with some stuff.
All right, there we go. As we get rolling here, I will run some of the Sims here. And I think the goal here is we'll talk through some spots, where there's input volatility, places we might want to bully the Sims. I'll get some of Adam's favorite game environments, favorite stacks. And then at the end of the show, we'll kind of go and maybe handpick some of the lineups that kind of line up with some of those takes. But I guess just off the rip, what are you seeing from this slate? Any kind of macro thoughts from your early research?
Yeah, I caught the end of JM, and I completely agree with what he was saying, where there's just so many different ways to go on this slate. There's the obvious, Dallas-Washington game that everybody's going to want to get pieces of. But I think there's a lot of different offenses that you can go to as a stack. There's a good amount of different quarterbacks that have been showing up in the early sims that I've run. And doing that, then it opens up the Dallas Washington game in different ways that you can attack if you want to, or obviously not. But yeah, it's one of those slates where like, I don't think it's so much there's a few mega chalk plays that you have to decide if you're going to play them or not. It's more so there's like a lot of really good plays, and that tends to flatten out ownership a bit to where maybe you're not playing a bunch of 2, 3, 4% owned guys, but you don't have to worry as much about do I play the 45, 50% owned guy, because everything kind of just flattens out typically.
Do you have any thoughts? I feel like some slates tend to lend themselves to, kind of overstacking or just really getting into a game environment. Obviously, people are going to be willing to do that with Commanders and Cowboys, but even some of these other spots, is this a week where you could see yourself getting into more of the onslaughts and game stacks?
Yeah, I kind of think so, because like on the one hand, you could argue no, because there are so many good plays, and obviously like the heavier you're stacking, the more you're focusing on one game. And so the opportunity cost is there. But on the other hand, like you do have a lot of low total games on this slate. So I think there's also the case for like going very aggressively after one game, whether that is, going heavy on the Chargers, going heavy on the Broncos, like JM was saying, going heavier than people typically want to on the Washington-Dallas game. Like that's one way you can be contrarian within the game that everybody is still going to is, if you go maybe Dak plus Lamb plus Pickens plus Ferguson or something like that, a lineup that a lot of people are going to rule out. So I do think that kind of the fact that there's a lot of good individual plays, but also a lot of relatively unappealing game environments overall kind of lends itself to that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's kind of interesting about that lineup JM had us build with Bo Nix is I think people want to gravitate to the pocket passers who are really easy to stack, or Jayden Daniels if they're going up, but people are going to be reluctant to play Bo Nix because like, who do I stack him with? They don't want to do that. Obviously Justin Fields, like who do I do it with? So I think some of those naked QBs may obviously in that conversation as well. That's always such a push pull for me, because it's like, yes, the field isn't going to do it, but it also doesn't tend to sim super well either, because it's saying, hey, you have to nail an 8-leg parlay instead of a 5-leg because you're not correlating additional pieces.
Yeah, I mean, one way that you get around that, and I don't do it a ton either, even in weeks where I do think it's a good idea. Like one way you can get around that is just to be heavier stacking on your wide receiver, running back, tight end pieces. Like those count as stacks, even though it's not what everybody is generally talking about when they reference stacks. But like if you're not using a wide receiver spot on Stephon Diggs or Quinshon Boutte or whoever with Drake Maye, then you can go Deebo, Lamb, Pickens, or something like that.
Right.
So that is one way you can kind of get around it. Like you still have a similar amount of correlation and stacking within your lineup. It just happens to not be at the quarterback position, which, obviously you're giving up a little bit of correlation because that is the strongest, most correlated spot. But, it does open up other ways for you to correlate.
Let's talk about a few input volatility spots here. And it's always fun on Run the Sims because we can actually see the granular level market share for these guys. One we didn't even really talk about with JM, but has been kind of the talk of Twitter and, Discord this week is what's going to happen with Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle with Hubbard back. We've gotten some cryptic quotes from Canales on, hot hand type stuff. Looks like Run the Sims has 60% rushing market share for Rico, 25% Chuba. How much volatility do you think are in these inputs?
A ton. I think I changed it like 4 times before the show. It's a lot. And like, it's one of those spots where like, if for whatever reason we were just like starved for good plays on this slate and you were getting like 1,000,000% ownership to Dowdle, it would be really appealing to just be like, all right, I'm just going to hope that it's a true timeshare and this is ugly. But then at the same time, right now our default ownership projection is at 3% on Dowdle. Like there's still some chance that they just feed him. And, it's not the other part here is like, it is Chuba Hubbard coming back from a 2-week absence. So even if the long-term plan isn't Rico Dowdle is RB1, there's also the chance that it's just like, okay, yeah, 2-3 weeks from now, it is a true timeshare. But right now, we're just going to let Chuba come back, get his feet wet, run 35% of routes, take 6-7 carries, and we'll let Dowdle handle things for another week. So there's that possibility. There is also the possibility that they just watched him for 2 weeks and we're like, oh yeah, this is our starting running back now. So like, I do think there's a ton of volatility there. It is one of those spots where when I'm running my lineups on Sunday, if I saw that like I was just straight jamming Rico Dowdle, I probably would go just walk it back because I don't want my stand on a Sunday to necessarily be that I have any idea what the Panthers are going to do.
For sure. And like even the game, Rico went nuts against the Panthers. I mean, Trevor Etienne had 4 carries. He had 5.5 yards per carry that game. So the real question here is like, we know Chuba's going to touch the ball. The question is it 4 to 5 touches, in which case Rico's probably a smash, or is it 10 to 12 touches, in which case Rico is probably one of the worst, points per dollar plays on the slate.
Right. And I think one reasonable way to think about it and project it, and this is right now a little bit higher than this, but like you could kind of project Chuba to be Rico Dowdle pre-injury and Dowdle to be Chuba. Like we saw how they were splitting that backfield. So you could go that route. We did see Dowdle getting a little bit more involved before the injury as well. So this is a little bit more aggressive than that, but I think something in that ballpark makes sense.
A few other input volatility spots I've been thinking about is Chargers pass catchers, QJ back. We've seen kind of like a clear delineation of like QJ, the alpha Lad really discarded to the side outside of week 1 when QJ was healthy. And then Lad kind of coming on these past 2 games. You drop QJ back in. Who do you think is the true number 1 this week for those guys?
Yeah, I've had trouble with that even prior to the injury because I don't want to project QJ as wide receiver 1 because of just who he is and who he's been in his career, and McConkey looked so good last year. But it's been one of those spots where like every week Quinton Johnston looks like the best option, and then I try and like find ways, like find numbers that support getting McConkey's projection higher, getting Quinton Johnston's to go down, and they aren't there. Like he's getting targeted more than McConkey. He's running more routes than McConkey. He's producing at a higher level. So I think at this point, as gross as it feels, like he is their wide receiver 1. I do think there is volatility clearly in that, like that wasn't our prior coming into the season. And we do only have 5 games of Quinton Johnston playing this year that has really impacted that projection. So there is more volatility there than in other spots where like it's what you expected or whatever. But at the same time, like it's been a consistent thing this year. McConkey just isn't getting targeted per route the way that you would expect him to. He's running a lot of routes, and that almost to me is like another point in favor of Quinton Johnston. Is it's not like Lad McConkey's out there running 60% route participation, and if that goes up, he's going to be the wide receiver 1. Like he's already out there running a ton of routes. He's just not getting the ball.
Yeah, and it's interesting here looking at the market shares. I do think it's an important one to figure out because we kind of know who Keenan Allen is. He's going to have that baseline, market share. He's going to be involved. And then the real question is it QJ or Lad that kind of separates? And you guys do obviously have a bigger touchdown market share for Quinton Johnston, 25% to Lad's 18%. But you look at this and like Lad is projected for less of a TD market share and overall market share than even Keenan Allen, which with QJ back, I feel like just makes him a tough click.
Yeah, I mean, I've had trouble getting to him all year, and even in the good spots, it kind of like he's sort of gotten there. He had the one big game, but yeah, I mean, if you look at like targets per route run this year, it's a spot where like it clearly delineates itself. It just doesn't do it in the way that you expected, so it feels really gross. But like coming into this week, Keenan Allen's at 0.27 targets per route run, clearly leading the team, and then he's running like 75% of routes on average. So he's running fewer routes than Johnston and McConkey, but he's getting targeted a ton. And then you have Johnston at 0.22, McConkey at 0.2. McConkey, when Quinton Johnston's been in, is a little bit lower, I believe. But you really have it like clearly set up as like Allen gets targeted the most often when he's on the field. Johnston and McConkey are on the field the most. Johnston has the higher yards per reception, higher ADOT, and gets targeted a little bit more. It's just that like it's all not completely, but mostly backwards from what we expected coming into the year.
Let's talk about your team here, the Commanders, because they obviously have some input volatility here, and maybe even more so the phrase is just so many moving parts. Terry McLaurin ruled out. I don't know if you have a lean on Deebo going or not after the report today, but maybe you can get your hand in the dirt and tell us who are the Washington Commander wide receivers we need to be playing this week.
I don't know. I mean, so like I'm assuming Deebo plays, and talking about input volatility, not even from the sense of like how many routes does he run, how targeted is he. To me, the hardest spot to project is always like I know this guy is hurt, but I don't know how badly. Like he didn't do anything on Monday night, so it would be easy to be like, oh well, Deebo clearly is banged up from this injury. You need to lower his projection, but like he was good every other game, and it's been 2 weeks now at least of him being injured. So I don't want to just like completely nerf his production or anything like that. But then for the rest of Washington, like Chris Moore pretty consistently has been running the most routes on the outside. Like Deebo's the slot guy. And then you have Chris Moore running the most non-Deebo routes pretty consistently with McLaurin and Noah Brown out. And then for Jalen Lane and McCaffrey, they're both running like 40 to 45% route participation. They're not out there a ton. McCaffrey is tricky because he's been extremely efficient. Like he gets 1 or 2 targets and he scores 1 50-yard touchdown every game. Clearly that's not going to continue. But then at the same time, do they just start using Luke McCaffrey more? He's done what they want him to do. He's, obviously developing as an NFL wide receiver. Is there a week eventually where they just say, all right, let's see what happens if we put McCaffrey on the field 60% of the time instead of 40? So that's the spot that's like really tricky to me is McCaffrey's making big plays, but he's not getting a lot of opportunities. He's not running a lot of routes. And then Chris Moore, we saw the big game last week, but that was still pretty much driven by 1 or 2 huge plays. So outside of Deebo, you're not getting anybody that's actually earning a lot of targets. You just have guys that all have big play potential, and they're cheap enough that if they do hit on that big play, you want them. But if they don't hit on it, they're probably scoring like 2 points.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating kind of trickle down thing too, just for DFS, because otherwise, like if Deebo were fully healthy and good to go, I mean, Jayden and Deebo would be one of the most popular stacks on the slate. If you remove Deebo, it's like, does that bring down the Jayden ownership? Does that really boost the Zach Ertz ownership? Does Chris Moore become the pump play of the week at 3K because everyone still wants to play Jayden Daniels? There's a lot of, ripple effects to that Deebo play.
Well, and there's also the run pass split. Like this game has a high total. Everybody's expecting it to be a shootout. One way that I always think is interesting to think about games like this where everybody's trying to get to a lot of pieces, not that Krosky Merritt is going to be low owned, but Washington would be perfectly happy to run the ball a lot. And if they were to not have Deebo, that has to make that even more appealing, going into a game against Dallas where you don't have any of your starting wide receivers. If you can get by with running Krosky Merritt, if Chris Rodriguez is active, or McNichols, doesn't matter. Like maybe just the rushing pie gets bigger and you have more carries. It's not like Dallas is likely to be able to stop them running. And if they can run the ball, control the clock, now you're just getting less total possessions in the game, making Dallas somewhat less appealing potentially. That's one angle where what if Washington's able to just get away with running the ball constantly and taking less, there being less total plays in the game. So maybe getting to like Krosky Merritt more so than the passing game.
Yeah. And in those situations, like, because the Commanders are the type of team that can spread it out a ton. And if like Bill and Jayden kind of cannibalized each other, there's like scenarios where this is like a pretty decent score for the Commanders and none of them are like in the optimal lineup.
Yeah, especially when you consider how many good mid-range running backs there are. It's not like if Krosky Merritt scores a touchdown and runs for 80 yards, he's guaranteed to be a great play at 6,100. Like there are plenty of guys in that range that can beat 80 yards and a touchdown, even though that's a good game for the price.
So if we aren't loading up here, what would be your favorite game environment outside of Commanders in Dallas this week?
Right now, it's looking like the Chargers. In the sim I ran before the show, it was a lot of Justin Herbert. It's a lot of QJ, a lot of Keenan Allen. And I think like it makes sense at their prices. Obviously, it's a high upside offense. It's an offense that's already shown that they are happy to pass more than people thought they were coming into the season. And then now, they're down to Kimani Vidal and Hassan Haskins at running back. Clearly, they would probably like to have the ball in Justin Herbert's hands. They're cheap overall as a stack. So that one's showing up a lot. Bo Nix is showing up quite a bit for me. I was glad to hear JM say that he liked that one because that was definitely one that kind of caught my eye where it's like, oh, I'm getting a lot of Bo Nix. I'm getting a lot of Cortland Sutton. Those aren't, they're not guys that I ever mind getting to, but they're not really guys that I expected to see when I was going through the slate for the first time. So, aside from the obvious, like I don't want it to come off that I don't like that Dallas game because obviously I do. But yeah, Herbert and Nix both showing up a bit for me.
Yeah, the Knicks one is definitely interesting. Nice team total. I feel like one spot, I mean, we briefly mentioned. Jacobs, I think myself included, am pretty scarred from, having Jordan Love on my best team last week, only to watch him not pass at all in the second half, which plenty of people reminded me is what the Packers do. The question is there ever a spot where you can see Jordan Love getting pushed, or is this just the Josh Jacobs show, even with this big total?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably the Josh Jacobs show. He is banged up. We have seen Emmanuel Wilson cutting in, getting, more carries over the last couple of weeks than earlier in the season. I'm always tempted by Jordan Love because I think he's good and he has cheap pass catchers. The thing that I think holds back, makes Jordan Love such a difficult guy to stack, in addition to, if the Packers do get out to a big lead, they're not going to push it typically, is part of the appeal of stacking is if your quarterback does well, you have a good idea of what wide receivers or pass catchers in general did well. And that's less true with the Packers than it is with a lot of teams, because even if you guarantee me that Jordan Love does well, does that mean Dontavian Wicks did well? Does it mean Romeo Doubs did well? Does it mean Tucker Kraft did well? Does it mean they all just had mediocre games? There's so many ways that even a good Jordan Love game goes that doesn't contribute anything else to your lineup, is another thing that sort of holds back Jordan Love a lot of the time.
Yep. Yeah, that is as someone who had the Dontavian Wicks as part of the stack, I learned that the hard way. And even Golden, right, where it's you come out of the bye, it when you're watching the game, it's he's making plays, and then you look at the overall snaps and the routes, and it's he's still a part-time player.
Right. Yeah. I don't remember which primetime game it was, but I was watching one of them and I was all right, Matthew Golden looks good. I think it's time to start getting on him. And then you go into the next week and it's just oh, he's still barely played and isn't really targeted that much. There's nothing really driving me wanting to get to Matthew Golden other than I like Matthew Golden.
Exactly. I know. Way too many players like that. I believe we call that wish casting, when we like the player in the role is not there to match up with the price. Let's talk a little chalk. JM and I hit on a few of those spots. We'll set aside the Deebo stuff just because we've been kind of already talking about that. I'll throw out Quinshon Judkins and Rashee Rice. I feel like those are going to be two extremely popular pieces. I mean, Rice is just so absurdly priced. Are there ways you can get away from him, or is that, dare I say, a free square?
I mean, it's kind of a free square, but there's obviously ways you can get away from him too. I'm looking right now, if I were playing a 150 set, I'd have 20% Rice, which I think is probably lower than the field, but it's still obviously a nice chunk of my lineups. But I think that is probably part of the reason too that I'm getting to so much Quentin Johnston and Keenan Allen, is that those guys are priced right around Rice. And so it sort of reinforces that even if they end up being a little bit more popular than projected, they probably can't get that popular because people are just going to click on Rice, not to mention all of the other good wide receivers that you have. So I think that that's probably one reason I'm getting to those guys sort of as a pivot away from him, whether it's in Justin Herbert stacks or just as a pivot away. But clearly I think he is mispriced. I don't think there's any real reason to think that he's significantly limited here. We've seen Mahomes still playing really, really well. Obviously, there is a massive role available for Rashee Rice. So the only thing, I guess, against him, and it's not even against him, is there are a lot of good wide receiver plays in this $5,500 to $6,500 range where, keeping in mind the volatility of the position, not in the sense that he's particularly likely not to do well, but in the sense that even though his median projection is certainly better than most or everybody priced around him, with the way you accumulate points in fantasy football, there's a lot of instances where if you go score 30 fantasy points, it doesn't matter if you're 6,500, 6,200, 5,600, you're just somebody that needs to be in the lineup. And so when you're talking tournaments, especially large field tournaments, it does become less important. Is he 2.8 points per dollar or 2.3? It doesn't matter. It's whoever scores 30 points.
Yeah, and I did. I ran some sims before the show, and we'll go through lineups in a bit, but I did just want to filter over to the exposures just so you could kind of see. And to your point, Rashee Rice, projected ownership 27%. I might even take the higher on that, and some of the small field stuff. The optimal rate, 16.9%. So not a ton of leverage there, quite the opposite. And that's kind of the situation you run into, and kind of your 20% benchmark seems to line up with kind of what the sims are spitting out as well.
Yeah, it's one of those spots where, it's become a lot more popular to talk about now, as people get better at DFS, but you're playing lineups, you're not playing players. Rice has the highest optimal rate of any wide receiver. So obviously he's a very good play. You can make plenty of good lineups that have him. At the same time, he's going to be in the Fields lineups at a rate higher than he's going to succeed. So you can also make plenty of good lineups that don't have him. It really just comes down the lineups that I want Rice in. It just comes down to what's the rest of that lineup look like. If I have a relatively low owned stack, then clearly put him in lineups. He's more likely than anyone else to succeed. But if I have, Jayden Daniels and if I'm stacking the Washington game, that's probably a game where maybe I want to go to Keenan Allen or Quinton Johnston instead of Rice.
Yeah, and it is the timing of this slate is a little tricky this week with the Commanders Dallas game being late and Rashee Rice obviously playing early. You're not getting any of that added information. Even if Rice hits, it's like, well, I'm holding hands heading into this late slate, and then you're kind of on the fence. Do I go contrarian or not? Even when JM and I were building that lineup, it's like, yeah, you do a Bo Nix stack, throw Rashee Rice in Judkins on there because it's already so unique, and yet the way the information will be relayed to us is not in an ideal order.
Yeah. And also kind of as you were bringing that up, I was thinking about like, what do you do with Deebo from a late swap standpoint? But I do think that there's going to be a lot of options there. Like you can turn him into Chargers receivers. You can turn him into Sutton in a lot of lineups. So I don't think that will end up being much of an issue. But yeah, as far as like the late swapping with, just is my lineup good or contrarian enough or whatever, like you're not really going to know.
And that's also interesting, the Deebo stuff, right? Where it's almost better to have Deebo as like a one-off piece because then the swap can be a lot cleaner. Whereas if you're building Daniels lineups, it's like there's no clean pivots. Like you're having to almost blow up the entire lineup around Jayden Daniels if Deebo isn't playing.
Yeah, I think you could get away if Deebo's out. It does increase the chances, like you were saying, of like Washington offense having a good game, but no one player being somebody you have to have. Like lots of good point per dollar guys. Chris Moore scores 12 points or something, but not guys that like are actually getting you to the top of tournaments necessarily. So I do think it would open the door to naked Jayden Daniels and then, play like Keenan Allen, play Cortland Sutton, whoever. Like I think it opens the door for that and it makes it more appealing than if Deebo is in, but it's still obviously not like the ideal swap.
Let's look at, it's kind of interesting over here if I sort this set by running back, Judkins showing negative optimal leverage as well, 19% projected own, optimal rate 13.1%. He is like one of those classic like ball knowers, DVP bros versus the projections because he was losing a ton of pass catching work to Jerome Ford last week. I think he had like a 40% snap rate, kind of something extremely low. And yet the Dolphins are just egregious. So like, how are you handling Judkins chalk?
Yeah. And I think he's a little bit higher now than he was depending when you ran that, but yeah, it's like I think he clearly looks good. It's a good matchup. One thing that actually stood out to me about this game, and I did change it adjust it since we do have the weather concerns. The prop market has it being a lot run heavier game than like our baseline model does. Pass attempts for both Tua and Gabriel came in a couple higher than the prop market. So that is something that I adjusted since there's a reason. The weather is likely to be pretty unappealing for throwing. But that is, like one negative potentially if like you were looking for a reason not to play Judkins is like, if this game does turn into one where both teams are throwing, which I think you could see, it's not like you can't throw in Miami and Cleveland's a very good run defense. Then that's not something that benefits Judkins since we have seen him lose passing down work. But yeah, I mean, it's a great spot for him. Like he projects for 90 plus rushing yards here. Clearly looks very, very good. It's just that there are so many good running back plays as well when you consider a range of outcomes. Like you have Javonte Williams there in that price range. Swift is $300 less. Breece Hall is $300 more. And that's without even getting to like the Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, H.N., Barkley range. There's just, so many good plays you can get to. J.K. Dobbins at 5,600 in that spot against the Giants. So Krusty Merritt, 6,100. Like there's so many good running back plays this week that, I think that's why you see that really flat optimal rate. It's not so much under appreciating Judkins or anything like that. It's just that, especially when you're talking optimal rate specifically, like it's true optimal. It's not how often does he do well enough that you're happy you played him, which is going to be a higher number than that. His chances of being like the true optimal running back are just naturally going to be relatively low because there's this whole bucket of guys that have a similar range of outcomes, even if he projects a little bit better.
Yeah, and the more I look at it and look at some of the pivots in the same price range, I think he is going to just be an incredible steam candidate. Like right now, we're seeing him at 19% owned. You look at what would be a pivot, Breece Hall, who's projecting well, showing up high in these optimal rates. I just don't think people want to play the Jets. Like I've heard people want to IKB that projection, say there's no way. Panthers D has been good, etc. And then otherwise you have DeAndre Swift. We just got news he is going to officially be listed questionable for this week with the groin injury. Like there's nowhere else to pivot in this range. People are just gonna be like, Judkins feels good, let me put it in.
Yeah, exactly. And to the point about steam, I hit, so like I first pushed baseline projections Wednesday morning. I hit publish, and I hadn't even like closely looked at anything. I just made sure that like players were in, players were out, and immediately have a message from Davis: Judkins projection way too low. And like it was, but it was just like immediate Davis in there, like, nope, Judkins needs more fantasy points. So I think that's a point in favor of people clicking Judkins very happily this week as well.
Yeah, and I always use the underdog drafts as kind of like a Steam sentiment index indicator. And I was doing a couple of the dog bowl drafts yesterday, the 12-person drafts. Quinshon Judkins went 102 in one of them and 103 in another. And obviously half point PPR over there, a little bit different, but still, like people are excited about Quinshon Judkins.
Yeah, he's such like it's such a weird spot too, because you can make either case. Like clearly you can make the matchup case. It's a great spot. He's getting all of the rushing work. All of that's great. But then you also like can take the step back and be like, okay, there's a bunch of running backs on this slate. Am I going to click the Cleveland Browns running back at 30% owned in a game with like a 38-point total or whatever it is?
I know. And it's so funny too, because I think the way the field will want to interpret the weather, and if those reports about the 50 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts are correct, like instead of being like this game could just be so gross and the total so low, it's like, well, they're gonna have to run it every single play. That's Quinshon Judkins music. So I just don't see any way that anyone's getting talked off of Quinshon Judkins this week.
Yeah, I think he looks great. I think it's just really a matter of like, how do you end up projecting his ownership come Sunday morning? Because if he's projected like he is right now, where it's just pretty flat, then he's going to look really good. And I think a lot of people will just jam him in. But then like the problem becomes, does he end up being 35% owned? And how much do I want of him if he is 35% owned, knowing that necessarily means some of these other guys that are projected for 15 to 20% ownership are actually like 8 or 10.
Yes. This is what we need, though. We need more. We need takes like this. Chad says it does feel like Judkins could be running into 10-man boxes if it's a nor'easter up there. I'm not even saying you're wrong, Chad, but I'm saying we need more talk like this so Judkins isn't 50% owned this week. So 10-man boxes, folks. You heard it. Also, I should mention Chad Candles is going to be my guest on DFS After Dark on Saturday night. If you guys are YouTube members, the Best Ball Value Hounds tier or higher, you can access that show. Chad has already punched a Dog Bowl qualifier ticket. I'm sure we'll talk some underdogs, some games he likes, draft a few teams. Join us tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern for that. One spot I wanted to ask you about, Chad, that I've been Ship, that I've been kind of excited about here is the Bears spot. And we did just get word DJ Moore is like good to go. So whatever was going on with his ball sack, I guess has been figured out. Do you have any interest in Chicago at home here versus New Orleans?
I think they were looking decent for me. My computer screen just kind of froze on me, but I like the spot. Like you should get plenty of plays here. It's obviously not, a bad matchup or anything like that. I prefer it if it were in New Orleans, getting in the dome, but yeah, I mean, like Caleb Williams is somebody that generally I get to because he does, not that he's like a running quarterback, but he does give you some rushing upside. He has, in theory at least, good pass catchers, even though DJ Moore has been pretty much MIA this year. Right now, like I have like 8% Caleb Williams, so pretty close to like the optimal rate and ownership. Romo Dunze, like 17% for me. He's clearly the pass catcher that I would want to get to the most. We did see Luther Burden being utilized a little bit more, but I don't think that's necessarily actionable for a main slate yet, but it is obviously something to keep an eye on. So I think I had a decent amount of like Caleb Williams plus DeAndre Swift plus Rome Odunze type teams, where you're mixing like the running back into that stack, which works perfectly fine.
Yeah, and I should just say, DJ Moore being fully good to go, it saved the Slappy Seals community so much money on Luther Burden, because Luther Burden's ownership was about to get out of hand if DJ Moore was out. It was going to be like the funniest projection versus ownership projection that we would have seen on the year. So let's just all be thankful that we're going to save that money to burn elsewhere. Any other contrarian game spots you like or stacks? You mentioned enjoying the Bo Nix thing as well. I know our guy Utica, who couldn't make it today, he wanted to throw a little shout out for the Philly Minnesota game, basically kind of referencing those guys getting overlooked and having so many big play specialists there. Any other spots you'd like to ID?
Yeah, so I'm not getting to that Philly game, but I do completely agree with Yuta, and I think I've said it like every time, every show I've done this year about the Eagles specifically, where like they are, from a team standpoint, probably like the biggest gap between median projection and ceiling, because it's really just what do they want to do this week, or are they forced to throw, because they have so much talent in their passing game with Devontae Smith, with Goddard, with AJ Brown. Obviously, you have these guys at like falling salaries because they haven't really done much this year, and on average, the Eagles just want to go in, run the ball, and get out of there with a really ugly, boring win. And so it keeps the salaries low. It keeps the median projections low. But anytime that the Eagles have to actually throw the ball, they just have cheap stud playmakers that, and a very concentrated target tree. It's not like you really have to worry about Jahan Dotson doing anything. I don't even, what do they have, John Mechie behind him? I don't even know who their fourth wide receiver is. So when they do have to throw, it's going to three guys plus Saquon Barkley. So they're always, I think, a good low-owned tournament team just because of how much talent they have. And generally they're going to be relatively low-owned because the most likely outcome is just not them throwing that much. So I'm not really getting to them still. There have been slates this year that I have, but when he mentioned that, there's no pushback for me. And then on the other side, it's kind of the same thing, right? Like you have, I assume, Carson Wentz. I don't know that I haven't seen if McCarthy's officially out yet, but I assume Carson Wentz. Either way, you have, questionable quarterback play, but you have a concentrated target tree with Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson. You have an absolute stud in Jefferson that is going to, I guess, get some ownership, but at the same time, probably come in behind like CD Lamb, I would definitely assume, in that price range. So you just have this spot where, I can play a relatively low-owned combination, or game stack of like Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, some combination of those guys. Clearly the ceiling is there, but also, again, just a spot that, at least right now, personally, I don't really have.
Yeah, I think the one nice thing about it is, like, outside of Jefferson, who I think can just get there in any game environment, he can get his 12 catches, hit the bonus, etc. Like the other ways, like Addison, Devontae, and AJ Brown hit, like they're probably bringing at least one of those other names along for the ride. They're probably bringing Ertz along for the ride. Like the way those guys hit are big plays, speed up the game. Like, I don't want to be in the habit of forcing mini correlations, but man, any combo of Addison with Devontae and AJ Brown just seems like the platonic ideal of a mini correlation.
Yeah, well, and especially like when, again, like just thinking about the Eagles, like obviously AJ Brown could have a big game just because of one mega play, but most of the time, if AJ Brown like gets 10 targets, the reason is because the Vikings have scored enough points that the Eagles don't have a choice but to give AJ Brown 10 targets.
Yeah, for sure. And, why we're mentioning this game, what do you think about Jordan Mason? He's, I guess, a little pricey at 6,200 and maybe kind of game script dependent, but he also seems like a guy who could, pop up for 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, he kind of strikes me as the perfect, like, if you're playing a lot of lineups, probably not a high exposure guy, like probably not somebody that I'm going into Sunday like, oh, I need Jordan Mason to have a good game, but kind of like the perfect, I have a popular quarterback, I have 3 popular wide receivers, I have a popular tight end, I need a running back that can score 3 touchdowns and also isn't going to be owned. Like Jordan Mason is kind of like the perfect guy in that specific lineup build, I think, because I think he's like a tier behind a lot of other guys, I think he's kind of like a third tier guy in the sense of you have the clear top, which is in like the mid-range where you have like Breece Hall, you have Judkins, and then you kind of like have that second tier where, it's probably like your DeAndre Swift type guys, Krosky Merritt. Like I think Mason in terms of chances of success is kind of behind all of those guys, but he still is the clear running back 1 here. He's going to get all the work he can handle. And still capable of, falling in the end zone 2 or 3 times. So I think he's like the perfect guy in that specific type of lineup build where you don't have a lot of him, but he's really useful in like a specific build.
For sure. I haven't gotten to do a show with you like since you joined the the Run the Sims and in-game syndicate team, or at least talking about how you use Run the Sims. Like, what is your preferred way to do it? And I'm not even super sure, like, what kind of contests are you playing? Are you 150 maxing? Like, how are you doing things these days?
Yeah, I've been kind of going back and forth between large field and then trying to focus more on smaller field stuff. I really like the update that we pushed, I guess, 2 weeks ago now, because it lets me filter some stuff out before sending it to Shady, which is really nice. But I've been basically just, running a initial set for whatever kind of contests I'm playing, seeing what I'm getting to. And then obviously, there are some spots where if I'm taking a stand and I'm confident in my inputs, I'm just going to take that stand. But obviously it's really easy to just go back and, I used the Dowdle example earlier, where it's just like, if I'm taking a crazy Rico Dowdle stand, I'm going to just lower his rushing market share because I think the range is massive. Just kind of getting everything set, sending it over to Shady, and then, just being able to go through those lineups at the end and just kick out ones that, for whatever reason, I don't want this onslaught, this triple stack, in Showdown. I don't want this lineup with like a kicker one-off or something like that. But, basically like lightly filtering, I guess, but still being able to go through and just kind of kick out lineups that I don't want.
And I assume when you mean kicking it over to Shady using the diversify the portfolio tool here. Yeah, for sure. And I should mention, as always, 10% off all the Run the Sims subs here with promo code Pete, including the Shady portfolio tool, which is very helpful if you're playing, anything more than a handful of lineups. Can make sure you are raising your floor for your EV, is I think one of the better ways to say it. When you do you set any global stack parameters, or do you like running it without any stacks when you do your first set?
I like running it without when I do my first set, because 1, it goes faster, but 2, like I like my first run just kind of being without my thumb on the scale at all, because I think that kind of puts me in a better position to make decisions than it lowers the risk of me like accidentally screwing something up and then like operating with information that isn't actually as good as I think it is. So I like running it initially without any, filters or settings or whatever, and then seeing what I'm getting and going through and being like, okay, like it tells me this is good, but I don't want it for whatever reason.
So yeah, right before the show, I did run a set here, and we can start going through some of the lineups, see where maybe teams line up with our takes, maybe getting us on some stuff we haven't discussed yet. I did 3,000 lineups. I did a 3K contest field size. I'm always kind of playing in the spies, the red zone. So that does the trick. And then no global stacks or anything here. For me, we can start to see what's bubbling up to the top here. The top EV lineup is a Patrick Mahomes to Rashee Rice. So I guess I would say no surprise there. I mean, do you worry at all about, one thing I was talking about with JM, it's like, because of the Jayden Daniels Deebo kind of uncertainty, I could see Patrick Mahomes being the most popular play on the slate and being paired with Rashee Rice, like at a really good clip. This lineup finding some unique ways to still maybe make it pop an EV, 2 Chargers wide receivers, a Michael Maye or bring back. But kind of what do you think about the overall like combinatorial ownership on Mahomes and Rice, and if that's something you're interested in?
Yeah, it was actually, I was going to say that in reference to this lineup. Like, I really like Mahomes because like he's been running a lot. Obviously he throws, like, there's a lot of reasons to like Mahomes. And if you were to get like a gap where Jayden Daniels is getting a ton of ownership at the expense of Mahomes, I would love Mahomes. But I think you also do run that risk, like you were saying, of at the end of the day, people just being like, okay, I can just play Mahomes with Rice. I don't have to worry about if Deebo Samuel's healthy. I don't have to worry about, all of this. The Chiefs still have like a 28-point total. Obviously, people will be scared off by the fact that they're like 12-point favorites or whatever. I do think this is one of those spots that you run the risk of ownership projections just being wrong because people decide that they want to go that route. But there are, like you said, ways to be different. My top lineup in the lineups I ran is also Mahomes and Rice, and it's got Alec Pierce, it's got Marvin Harrison, who may or may not even play. But I think the Chargers is a way to be different. I think there's plenty of lower owned, higher upside shots that you can take and mix in with a Mahomes Rice team.
Yeah, and like another thing you could probably mess around with too is if like you wanted to exclude a player, like if you're like, I'm worried about Mahomes Rice being really popular, maybe I exclude Quinshon Judkins from this. And of course, he does pop up in these two top ones, but then in the third one, you have like a Breece Hall, Kamani Vidal, and it's like those two right there without Judkins will probably make a lineup very unique.
Yeah, and I think on slates like this, like it's something that I point out a lot, but like everybody always focuses on like the total ownership of their lineup. You know, how popular are the guys I'm playing? How popular are the guys you're not playing is also part of the whole equation. Like if it's a combinatorial thing where, I mean, if you play like Mahomes, Worthy, Kelsey, obviously that's a contrarian lineup, not having Rice, but also, you know, if you have a lineup, let's say that Breece Hall ends up at 30% projected ownership and Judkins ends up at 25 and, you know, Taylor's at 25 or something like that. If you have a Mahomes Rice lineup that just has 3 other running backs, that's already at least a relatively contrarian lineup just by not having guys.
For sure. Yeah. And especially in some of the smaller field contests, like, I mean, you know, you look at people in the Thunderdome or whatever that are essentially running cash game lineups with like one stack or one pivot. It's like, even in these 1,000 to 3,000 person contests, like every time you stack one other over 10% piece, it's like the number of total rosters with that combo just shrinks so quickly.
Right. Yeah. It's the kind of catch-22 of playing smaller field stuff. Like it's harder to cash because everybody's better in playing like highly projected lineups, but also you just get these opportunities to get like really good plays at lower ownership than you get in large field stuff.
We're also seeing a good bit of Justin Herbert lineups. You mentioned that before. It does look like the majority of these are Herbert, QJ, Keenan double stacks. Here is a lad Keenan here 5th down, but that the Keenan and QJ stuff looks pretty good here.
Yeah, for sure. And like those are the two that I would want to get to the most. I did see somebody in chat say, why not use like McConkey as a contrarian play? And like you can, like obviously he has a path to being good. He's Lad McConkey, but like the Charger stack itself is relatively contrarian. So like you don't necessarily have to build the Charger stack and then go, okay, how do I build a contrarian version of the contrarian Charger stack? It's, you know, at most going to be the 3rd most popular team, probably like 4th or 5th behind Kansas City and Washington. So you're already being somewhat different there at least, but it is also, and, you know, I guess to plug the shady tool, that is one thing I like about it a lot. You know, you mentioned raising your floor, but like, it's always tough when you're really, regardless of if you're using sims, optimizers, whatever, it's one thing to get to where it's just like, okay, well, I think the Chargers are a good stack here. But then if I'm going to play 20 different Charger stacks, I also want to be mixing in the Lad McConkey stack a couple of times at least. I don't just want to have all my eggs in the specific Herbert plus Johnston plus Keenan Allen basket.
I should also mention too, if you guys watch this show but don't watch Lulz, last week on Lulz, we had shady advice on, and we got into even more detail on how to think about the portfolio diversity, just concept itself, if you're kind of having a hard time wrapping your head around it, because it doesn't necessarily mean diversity in specific players. Like if Patrick Mahomes was priced at 4K, you probably wouldn't have much diversity away from Patrick Mahomes on this slate because he would be such a good play. But there are things that the Sims are able to account for to make sure that your risk of ruin isn't as high on a given GPP slate. Highly recommend that combo with shady advice last week. I'll read for the audio listeners this top Justin Herbert lineup, the full thing. I think it's pretty interesting. It's the Herbert to QJ and Keenan. It's not forcing any bringbacks. Has Achane, Bill, and Javonte, so both running backs from that high total game. Has Rashee Rice, the chalk piece, and then Mason Taylor, a really solid tight end pump play there. I have not talked about Achane yet on this entire show with Jab, with you. Everyone excited to play Judkins in the weather game on the ground. Do you have any love for Achane?
Yeah, I always do. It's a usage thing. I saw somebody mention in chat, like, we really like Achane against the Browns. It's just like he's running routes 80% of the time. He's getting, 65+% of their rushing market share. It seems like, and obviously it's going to fluctuate week to week, but it seems like they kind of did the same thing with Ali Gordon that the Jags have done with Tootin so far, where you had a couple weeks where it's just like, oh, they're turning this into a timeshare. And then they were like, never mind, we're going right back to the Achane show. Ali Gordon is getting carries, but he's not like cutting into Achane. So you just still have this super talented running back and pass catcher. And that's one thing that he gives you that, Judkins doesn't, or at least hasn't. And yeah, so it's like, yeah, the matchup sucks. The rushing matchup sucks, but the player himself is super talented. He's going to catch passes in full PPR. Obviously, that gives you at least some semblance of a floor. Huge playmaking upside. So, like, when I see HN lineups this week, I'm not looking at it. There's a lot of guys that I'm looking at, and it just feels good because it's just like, I know they can fail, but also how do they fail here? HN, it feels like he can have that like 5 fantasy point game. It feels gross, but at the same time, like, it's a really good, highly utilized player in a game that kind of he's like weather agnostic, I think, because the more they throw, like, they're throwing him short passes. If they do have to run a lot, then obviously he's getting the carries.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, it does feel like, we can't prop up Judkins for the game environment and then simultaneously knock HN for it. Like, he does. It's not quite the same thing because wind is way worse than snow. But I always think about that Shady McCoy snow game where he was just the entire offense. And like Devon HN's like a Shady McCoy type player where he's going to catch the balls, can run for them. So I could see him obviously being a massive usage monster. And one thing you notice in these sim lineups too, like, it's week after week, you look at these top teams, and if there isn't one play that makes you kind of stop and be like, oh, that, I don't know if that feels good, well, then you need to just go look at cash game lineups, and every single play will make you feel warm and fuzzy inside. So I feel like that's a hallmark of these top EV teams anyways. Yeah.
And I was gonna say, the one that you had at the top, I really like in general, but also, like, if HN is the guy in your lineup that you're just like, oh, I don't like that, like,
yeah,
probably a pretty good lineup overall. And one other thing for HN too, with the weather, let's say you do get the wind game, that is going to make it so Tua, who already can't throw a deep ball, really can't throw a deep ball. It doesn't mean they're not going to just throw 10 2-yard passes to HN.
For sure. For sure. One other one I just wanted to pull up here was the Bo Nix stuff, because there is one really good lineup that shows up here. There was a few Jayden Daniels, but I feel like we've talked enough Jayden Daniels today. But just kind of fun seeing another Bo Nix one, because with JM, we did it with Ingram. I think this is a really good matchup for Troy Franklin as well, who shows up in this one. This lineup is Bo Nix double to Sutton and Franklin, Jonathan Taylor, Javonte Williams, Rashee Shaheed is kind of the interesting pivot, Rashee Rice still, Trey McBride, who will be popular, and then Eagles defense. I like the way this one looks too.
Yeah, I like that one as well. One other thing I would point out, and I'm not getting to it, and I'm with you as far as, like, Franklin looking good. Pat Bryant is kind of quietly taking over Trent Sherfield's routes. So I don't think it's anything that you would consider outside of like a milli maker, but if you wanted to throw some Pat Bryant in, we have seen his route participation in the last few weeks go from 38 to 53 to 58%, while Trent Sherfield is now barely getting on the field.
Yeah, that's an interesting note. And I know I was listening to my guys, Ben Grutch and Sean Siegel, talk about it, and they were talking about a specific like little slant route that they drew up for him to get a first down, and kind of hearkening back to Sean Payton talking about him being the Michael Thomas and then drawing up those exact roles or plays for him there. So I like that shout as well. We are going to get out of here, although I get a $1.99 super chat for a start sit question. This is the only way you can end a DFS show about Sims is with a start sit. I was offered Bowers for my Rico. Fighting solves everything. $1.99 is really nice. I would need to know so many things about your roster. Do you need a tight end? Do you need a running back? My gut take says I'm just taking the L on Bowers this year and take the Rico side. That's what my heart says. I don't know if
gut is that. My gut is you probably want Rico, but also you probably can get not more talented necessarily, but like a more useful piece than injured Brock Bowers.
Yeah, exactly. But there you go. I am officially, though, raising the bar. It's going to require more than $2 to get me to answer a start, sit, or trade question on this show going forward. I have to have more self-respect. I need to do that for me. You guys got to follow ShipMyMoney DFS on Twitter. You can see it here on the screen at ShipMyMoney DFS. Check out Run the Sims, 10% off, all of this stuff. Go in there, tweak the market shares, mess with the different settings, use the portfolio diversity tool, all kinds of good stuff to get you squared away for these slates, both the main slate classic and the showdown. Anything else I'm forgetting here, Adam, before we head out?
No, I think that was it.
Beautiful. Appreciate everyone hanging out. Thanks again to Adam for filling in for you this week. Thanks to JM. Thanks to all the conversations in the chat. I'm hopping over to do Off and On the Clock with the Badge Bros. We'll run through the slate from an underdog perspective. If you're watching here, you should be redirected. Otherwise, you can head over and click on that video. Until next time, I'm Pete Overzet. We'll see you.